Okay, well, good evening and welcome to our May 11th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Just a couple of items to go over before we officially start. This meeting is on Comcast Local Channel 27 live, as well as the Pacific Coast TV's website. Looks like we do have some community members in attendance this evening, and everyone in attendance will have the opportunity to speak. The chair for attendees, the Planning Commission chair will open and allow general and specific items for public comment during each of the items. So Commissioner Reddick will handle that. Those willing to speak, we will recognize you by you raising your hand. And at that time, you can mute and unmute yourself via telephone, *6, and then raise your hand, *6. And to mute is *9. You will be given 3 minutes each public comment. This afternoon, staff did email the Planning Commission some supplemental memo on the items for discussion this evening. And I thank you for your patience while we still do virtual meetings. And I will now hand over this to Chair Reddick to officially start.
Thank you, Bridget. It's my pleasure to call to order this May 11th, 2021 meeting of the Half Moon Bay Planning Commission. Would you please join in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Bridget, would you like to take the roll, please?
Sure. Commissioner Benjamin.
Here.
Commissioner Gorn.
Here.
Commissioner Hernandez.
I am present.
Vice Chair Polgar.
Yes, here.
And Chair Reddick.
I am present.
All 5 commissioners are present this evening.
Excellent. The first item on our agenda is approval of minutes of the last meeting of April 27th. Do commissioners have edits or comments on those minutes? If not, can I have a motion to approve the minutes, please?
So moved. I second the
Commissioner
motion.
Benjamin, thank you. Commissioner
Sure.
Hernandez seconds.
Commissioner Benjamin.
Here.
Commissioner Gorn.
I have to abstain.
Oh, that's right, you were absent. Commissioner Hernandez.
Aye.
Vice Chair Polgar.
Yes.
And Chair Reddick.
Yes. Minutes approved.
Minutes are approved.
The next item on our agenda is public comment, which as at every Planning Commission meeting, members of the public who are participating are welcome to address the commission on anything they like, other than the items that happen a little bit later on our agenda. So if any members of the public would like to address the commission, please virtually raise your hand.
I'm seeing none, Chair Reddick.
Thank you. We will go to our next item, which is our study session on the proposed new mixed-use building at the corner of, at the northeast corner of Main Street and Kelly Avenue. And Mr. Garrison, are you presenting on that?
I am.
Wonderful.
Am I sharing the screen yet?
Yeah, I see your screen.
Okay. Well, good evening, Chair Ruddick, members of the commission. For the record, I'm Doug Garrison, senior planner for the city. A little bit of background. We've been working on this project for, I think, about 2 years now. It's been through a lot of evolution as far as the scale and the design. We thought about bringing this to the Planning Commission sooner, but there were just so many moving pieces that just didn't make sense until we had the bones of the project pretty firmly in place. And I think we're there now. And so just for people who aren't familiar, this is the vacant corner right across from City Hall on Main and Kelly, where there used to be a gas station. At one time, there were 3 lots here. The corner lot, the one just to the north where the existing building is, 433, 435 Main, and then also the lot behind 433 Main that fronts onto Johnston Street. Under a previous owner, these lots were merged into a single L-shaped lot. Current proposal would re-subdivide it into the original configuration. Charlene Cardoni, the current owner of 433 Main, would keep that property. The other 2 lots would then be conveyed to the developer, Tony Uccelli, and then they would all share shared parking, shared access from Johnson Street through permanent easements. So to make it clear, the existing building at 433, 435 Main, it does appear in the city's historic resource inventory. They do note that it's been altered over the years, which does detract a little bit from the architectural integrity. For this project, there are no changes of a substantial nature to that property proposed. It has been vacant for a while. It's been going under renovation. That work is almost completed. I think they're about ready to get their final occupancy signed off. The only changes, a lot of their utility connections are on the south side of that building and what would be the paseo of this project. And those would probably just tidy up a little bit with maybe build some cabinets around that. There might be minor change to the exterior staircase, but nothing major to that building. The current project for the corner would be 2100 to 2,500 square feet of commercial use on the ground floor on the corner. Total of 6 new apartments, 2 above the commercial space, and then 4 in a separate building just to the east, fronting onto Kelly Avenue. I would note that I made an error in my staff report about parking on, I believe it's page 6. I'll get into that in a minute or so and just correct the numbers there. But the applicant's providing in this plan 15 spaces. And again, that would be shared between both property owners, all 3 buildings. Some other sort of amenities and public goods. There is a public plaza paseo planned about 10 feet wide. They are proposing 4 electric vehicle charging stations, some green infrastructure as far as on-site stormwater retention through bioswales, that sort of thing. And then also, like I mentioned, it does include a parcel map, which just returns the lot lines to where they were originally. I want to start out with, before jumping into this project, just a little bit of background on what we look for just in urban design, Main Street redevelopment project principles, and how they've applied to the evolution of this project over the last couple of years. So one key thing from just an economic development standpoint, there's a lot of synergy with mixed use projects. It's beneficial to have a mix of commercial and residential. The residents shop in all the businesses downtown. The downtown businesses provide services for the residents in the area. An important feature is identity, placemaking. Oftentimes these are at the entrance to businesses, districts like the Highway 92 Main Street intersection or Main Street and Highway 1. But it also applies to major intersections within a business district. And this is really the crossroads of the historic core of downtown. It's a very important place. And so it deserves a prominent building. It's important that it's a building that kind of stakes that out and lets people know that they've arrived right in the middle of Half Moon Bay. So it is appropriate to have a little bit larger building right on the corner. For site planning, you generally want to avoid having parking in front of the building between the sidewalks and the street. That's more of a suburban design, and best practices, currently sort of go away from that now. So in this case, they've been able to consolidate all the parking in the rear. It's not really visible from Main Street or Kelly. It also cuts down on the middle of driveways crossing the sidewalks. Just makes it for a more pleasant place for people to be out walking around. Don't have to worry about your kids, being run over by a delivery truck backing out of the driveway, that sort of thing. On the street frontage, it's primarily a pedestrian level experience. So you want lots of prominent street level windows, especially for retail businesses. The building should have lots of visual cues that draw people's attention through articulation, some artistic details like artisan tile work and maybe window planter boxes, that sort of thing. And that helps, again, let people know that they're not at a strip mall out in the suburbs. It's downtown Half Moon Bay, and it's an important building. The other factor is the whole scale, how it fits in with the neighborhood. And in this case, it's 3 stories. It's a little bit tall, around 35 feet. But if you look around that neighborhood, if you look at Cunha's across the street, it's generally consistent with what you'd find in the core of Half Moon Bay. The tricky part is that as you move east towards Johnson Street, it's all low profile residential homes. And so you need a transition from the more dynamic Main Street to the more residential. And that's where a lot of our redesign was focused on, was figuring out how to make that transition work. So before we even had an application, we went through multiple revisions just between the staff and the developer and his architect. Just for some context, originally this project was twice as big. It had 12 apartments. It had 2 stories of commercial on the corner. There was a large reinforced concrete platform that covered much of the property that would have 2-story apartments on top of it, built really almost right up to the property line, sort of looming over the little houses on Johnson Street. Different access configurations coming in from Johnson and out on Kelly, or just different approaches. By the time we got a preliminary application in late 2019 and went to the Architectural Advisory Committee, it had been pared down to 8 apartments. The elevated concrete platform was gone. There were still some parts that had to be worked out. It was still kind of rough. We went back to the Architectural Advisory Committee this year in January and again in March. For those meetings, it's been scaled back to 6 apartments, provides a much better transition to the Johnson Street properties, firms up the site planning. I think the building footprints are where they should be, the parking's where it is. We're still sorting out some of the finer details, but the basic bones of a good project exist. So as I kind of got into, I've got a few of I'll show a couple of drawings of sort of the early conceptual plans, and you can see how far we've come. As I mentioned, there are some issues with the building just to the north. It is potentially a historic resource. Um, so when you design a building that close to an historic building, you don't want to copy it, but you also don't want to overwhelm it. Um, this design, the scale, sort of modern Mediterranean design, I think works well in that context. As far as uses, we don't know what any of the commercial uses will be in this building or in the building at 433 Main Street. But we do have to consider noise, traffic, hours of use, um, those kinds of issues, as well as just general amenities, how the paseo is going to be used, any kind of public amenities, landscaping, as well as for the tenants. So this was an early one. And you can see the traffic came in on Johnson and then exited on Kelly. There were quite a few more parking spaces. Above all those cars, if you look at the second floor, um, all these little rectangles that are numbered 1 through 12, they look kind of like parking spaces, but those are actually apartments. They would have been two-story apartment buildings several feet above where the parking spaces are. And again, you can see they're built right up to the property line, really kind of looming over Johnson Street and the little purple house on the corner of Kelly and the other one just to the north. So the current site plan is really quite a bit different with 6 apartments. There's two-way access for cars on Johnson Street, 15 parking spaces. There's a public paseo that allows people to walk from the parking lot out to Main Street, another walkway to Kelly. And then in this area, right along the east side of the residential building, that's where a lot of the utility connections, some of the stormwater infrastructure is going to be sort of tucked away where it's not visible from the streets. The correction here from the report, I think I said they needed 14 spaces. There are different ways to calculate this. I think they probably need 19 spaces. They're providing 15. It's a little complicated in that we don't know what the commercial uses are. Also how you can, commercial spaces, if they're retail, it's 1 space for every 300 square feet, much more if it's a restaurant, but you get to net out areas that aren't customer serving. So we don't really know what the final square footage is. But so those are things, there's a little bit of moving pieces here. One thing from history on our previous proposal that went through the city years ago, that developer got credit for closing down the gas station, which was essentially one big driveway. And so the city gave them credit for those new street parking spaces where they shut down all the driveways and restriped it. And one could argue that this developer should inherit that credit. That's something for the Planning Commission to decide. It's a little bit of a gray area. So I think on the parking, I think we're pretty close. We are going forward assuming that some kind of parking exception is appropriate. The scope of that and how much flexibility it should have is something we'd like some input from the Planning Commission tonight, if possible. The architect is in attendance. I'm going to let him discuss most of the architectural details. I'm just going to skim over a couple of things. You can note the large sidewalk level windows. One thing about the corner building is it does step back in on the second and third floors. That's an accepted design technique that reduces the sort of the perceived mass of the building on the corner, also provides some articulation, a little visual interest. For the tenants, it gives them a little bit better sense of privacy. Looking from Main Street, the drawing on top, you can see the Paseo, front of the proposed corner building, also the existing building to the north. Drawing on the side, this is an area where the dumpsters would go. This is on the east side of the building. It was originally proposed to be over on the Paseo side, and after a lot of back and forth, everybody decided it'd be better to just keep that area around the Paseo free and clear for whatever future uses would go in there. Some of the architectural details, decorative wrought ironwork, balconies. They don't really show up on these renderings, but on the fronts of the buildings, there will be some decorative tile work, some other artistic finishes to dress the place up. So as far as comments on this item, I received one from the public. It was another property owner on the other side of Main Street. His only comment was he didn't think the city should require an excess amount of parking. Also suggested it would be a good idea for the city to start a program where we would accept in lieu fees instead of requiring parking for buildings like this. We did get some comments from Commissioner Hernandez and Chairman Ruddick. Addressed those in a supplemental memo that was sent to the Planning Commission. Key issues there were light and views, tenant amenities, as well as how would this project comply with ADA and building code compliance, what kind of electric vehicle chargers were proposed. So I think for this meeting, we're looking for Planning Commission feedback about the scale of the project, the compatibility with the existing neighborhood, some of the public features like the Paseo and amenities. One of the concerns about the Paseo is we don't know what businesses are going in. So we're trying to find a balance where we don't over design it for something that may not be used for, but also don't preclude uses for it, depending on what the businesses are. Any thoughts about parking, what the appropriate amount of parking would be, how it should be managed, and also just about the general architectural design. So after this study session, we'll take the Planning Commission and public comments under advisement. Architect can revise the plans as appropriate. We will be going back to the Architectural Advisory Committee for a fourth time. And if we get all the loose ends tied up, at some point in the future, we'd be coming back to the Planning Commission for the hearing on the project. That concludes my presentation. I believe the applicant and the architect are available. They may have a few words to say.
I wonder if we might see if commissioners have clarifying questions at this point, and then perhaps the applicant and architect speaking could help answer some of those questions. Commissioner Hernandez?
I just had a chance to get the memo, so I apologize. Doug, could you take a moment, please, to summarize the feedback from the Architectural Review Committee that has not been incorporated into this project? I understand a lot of changes have been made around massing, location, parking alignment, and things like that, but could you talk about the specific feedback from Architectural Review that hasn't been incorporated into this project? The big pieces.
Well, I think the pattern initially was there were big changes. There were entire buildings they didn't like. There were aspects of the design, the whole site they didn't like. So it started with some very big comments. And then towards the middle there, I think it was not exactly a fine tooth comb, but a sort of medium where it was less about the sort of the building footprints and the general layout. It was more about the the architectural details. There was still some concerns about some of the buildings that would be fronting onto Johnston Street at that time. They didn't really have a residential feel to them. At that point, we didn't really have the building facades, the architectural details worked out. So there were a lot of comments on that. As we got to the third meeting, and that's where we were down to 6 units. There were no new buildings fronting onto Johnson Street. It got more into the architectural details. And so for the corner building, a lot of the focus was that they needed more information about sort of the window treatments, what kind of windows, are they big window sills? Also more information about what kind of decorative touches, tile work. They had comments about the types of windows, the size and shape. We looked at some different approaches for the corner. I think if you look through the comments from one of the meetings, one suggestion was to make the corner kind of stand out. Sometimes a tower element on the corner would work. Architect put one in that didn't work. So we had another meeting where a lot of it was focused on not having the corner of a bell tower on the corner. And we sort of shifted back to this chamfered angled facade over the front door. For the second building, the residential building over on Kelly, there were, I think for the second meeting, the design was more of a kind of a neo-craftsman style. It looked like a large craftsman style house with 4 apartments in it. And the consensus was that it was just the wrong design for that size building in that location. They recommended maybe a townhouse approach or an Italianate, something like that. And that's where we got the current design that you're looking at tonight, which is a little more residential looking, has the traditional bay windows. It's a little more blocked off, a little more consistent with the downtown kind of architecture as opposed to having the peaked roof you'd find in residential. Initially, there were a lot of concerns about parking lot layout. Did it meet ADA standards? Some of that was because all the parking was under this elevated concrete platform, and it wasn't clear if there was enough vertical clearance for a ADA accessible van and stuff like that. I think a lot of those issues got worked out when we got rid of the elevated platform and just have a parking lot at grade. They did raise concerns about the paseo. They thought it was a little bit plain, that it could be dressed up a bit. There was a lot of concern about where the dumpsters were originally located, facing the paseo behind a roll-up door. There were a lot of recommendations to maybe consolidate all the dumpsters over in the parking lot, maybe behind 433 Main Street. That would free up some area where that plaza could be expanded, made a little bit nicer if that's the direction that the business is moving in, could take advantage of. So the applicant did, instead of moving it over there, rearranged the floor plan in the corner building and moved it over to the other side of the building where it could be accessed from Kelly. They have not seen that change yet. That was since the March meeting. When we go back, they'll be looking at that. They also had some recommendations for the facade of the residential building that were, I think, fairly minor in nature. They thought it was important to differentiate it a little bit more from the main building on the corner, make it stand on its own. Those have been incorporated. They haven't seen those yet. I think that there's been a lot of changes. I think that gets to the gist of it.
So if I could just summarize, there were quite a few changes in the last iteration.
some of which have gone through ARC, but really many of these items haven't gone back to ARC for feedback on, yeah, that works, or no, this doesn't work. That's an open-ended question at this point.
That would be correct. For the
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll defer to my colleagues for now. I'm going to take a moment to just get caught up on this memo, and I'll try to listen while my colleagues ask any clarifying questions they may have.
Okay. Doug, to clarify, did I understand you to say that there are architectural details and features that are intended but are not shown in the artist's renderings that we have tonight?
I would say many more are shown now than were in earlier versions. I think my own personal professional opinion is that we probably do need some more details as to sort of the proposed tile work and things like that. A little more detail for windows. It's very important you get a kind of a 3D understanding of how, is it a wide window sill? Or is it more of a modern, with the glass flush up against the front facade? Those kinds of things really are important. And I think we're getting closer on that, but we probably need some more details would be my take.
Okay, well, that makes sense. It's important for us to know that we're not responding to a finished product, though, but this is, if it's still work in progress, it's a good time to offer suggestions. Commissioner Gorn, please.
So I just had two questions. One is the 6 residential units, are those all 1-bedroom units? It looked like there were maybe a couple that were 2-bedroom units.
In the smaller building, the residential building on Kelly, the 2 ground floor units are 1-bedroom. And then there are 2 apartments upstairs that are both 2 bedrooms. The 2 apartments over the commercial space on the corner are 2 bedrooms. And then we also, for parking and that sort of thing, we include the existing apartments upstairs from 433 Main, and those are both 2-bedroom apartments.
So
they're all 2-bedroom except for the 2 ground floor.
Okay. And so when you're looking at parking, you're looking at the number of people who will be living there. And do you have an idea of what that would be? Because, usually it's 2 people for a 1-bedroom. So maybe, I don't know. So
well,
what's your thought about that?
What we're working on, there was a zoning code amendment maybe a year ago or so that it revised the parking standards in the core, the Heritage Main Street area, because we were just having problems with mixed use projects on these old lots. The old parking standard said you had to, regardless of what kind of residential unit, said you needed a 2-car garage for it, which in a mixed use project doesn't really work.
Right.
So we're going by the numbers in the code, which are for a 1-bedroom, a studio or a 1-bedroom apartment, you need 1 space. If it's 2 bedrooms or bigger, you need 1.5 spaces. You need, for just 100% residential, you need 1 guest parking space for every 4 units. However, the code goes on to say that if it's a mixed use project, the Planning Commission can waive the guest park requirement. And then also for mixed use projects, the Planning Commission can approve a 20% reduction in the total number of spaces. So for the commercial, in this case, if we're assuming that it's pretty low intensity retail, that kind of thing, not a destination restaurant, requirements there are based on the square footage of customer serving floor area.
Right.
And that's 1 for 300. If it's a restaurant, it's a lot more.
Okay. So just so that I understand, where the 6 units that we're talking about, 4 of them are 2 bedrooms and 2 are 1 bedrooms. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then you're also kind of figuring out that the number of people who are working in those commercial spaces is going to be low.
Yes.
Anywhere from probably 4 to 6 people or something.
Well,
So
the
just to get
zoning
an idea.
code for retail doesn't get into the number of people. They say it's
Right.
on square footage that's available for
Okay.
customers to come into. If it's a restaurant, then it's based on the number of employees plus the square footage that's available. But if it's, you know, a sort of a boutique retail kind of store, maybe it's an owner and one other person, but they're using numbers that are generated by professional organizations like the Urban Institute or Institute of Traffic Engineers. They generate lots of numbers for different kinds of businesses that they need. They generate this many vehicle trips, this many parking spaces. So it's based off of that.
Okay.
Story.
So the other clarifying question I had is, is this project open to future ADUs? Like, can they convert some of this, maybe a 2-bedroom, for instance?
The architect and the developer could probably fill some of the blanks in there, but as I understand it, to meet minimum ADA requirements, they have to, essentially they're going to make the 2 ground floor units accessible, or what's called in ADA parlance, something readily converted to ADA compliant. And so in that case, the front doors are essentially at sidewalk level. They have to be minimum width. The hallways have to be a minimum width. There has to be room to turn wheelchairs around, that sort of thing. Single floor. Bathrooms have to be built with bracing behind the sheetrock walls so that you can just go ahead and attach grab rails to it. I believe that's what they're going for. As far as converting the upper units to ADA, I think that would be very difficult.
Can I interrupt you for a second? So forgive my acronym usage, but ADU is what I was wondering about.
ADU, I'm sorry.
So if Doug doesn't mind, I'm going to pop in here because I've got this little bit of code memorized. This project wouldn't qualify as designed for ADUs. Multifamily development can have some ADUs per state law, but it needs to be located within existing developed space. It's a very limited number of ADUs, and the space is typically garage space that could be repurposed for living space that could create an ADU. In this case, we don't have any structured garage space. The open parking condition won't provide a way to evolve a parking area into an ADU. So I would say no. You also have you will have a discretionary approval on this project and likely a parking exception, which would really affect the ability to change the unit composition later without, you'd have to have an amendment to any entitlement granted through a coastal development permit. So I don't think that applies in this case.
So I understand about the no garage, but converting a 2-bedroom apartment into a studio, 2 studios and a 1 or whatever, that's not in the cards here.
Don't think they can do that, and that isn't the kind of space that was anticipated for conversion from that code. We'll go back and check that. As you know, the ADU state law keeps changing every year, and we'll double check that. But you do have a discretionary permit on this, and we can be mindful about those kinds of conversions.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Benjamin?
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, Doug. This was a really interesting report, and it brought up a lot of issues with that lot that I haven't thought about for a long time. So thank you for the report. The first one was, as you mentioned in the report, it was a gas station back in the day. And I wonder if the condition of the soil informs the opportunity for different kinds of subgrade development. I know there was a review and decision against doing parking below grade in conjunction with an earlier version, but perhaps there are opportunities for, I don't know, storage or something like that in that area. Is that part of the design consideration that was rejected because it was too expensive, or is it just not relevant because the soil was already great?
Well, let me start with the gas station without getting quite into where you're going. I would like to just mention that when the gas station was removed, they did go through hazmat remediation, remove the fuel tanks. They've got a clean bill of health from the county environmental health department for the soil as far as contamination goes. I know that the applicant did have a soils report prepared to look at the structural limitations or capabilities, and particularly when they were looking at elevating everything up on a raised concrete platform. But I haven't really been looking at that because that hasn't been part of the project for the last year. I believe the applicant does have, I think, a civil engineer on line tonight along with the architect. They may be able to delve into that a little bit more. Frankly, I just don't know the answer.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that they should or shouldn't. I was just curious whether there was a constraint associated with the soil. So that's fine. They can talk about it or not. Then I also am interested in your impression, and maybe this is an architectural question. Who the right person to think about this is, I defer to you. As you pointed out, there's a certain amount of gravitas at this point. You're right next to City Hall. You're kind of in the center of town. And I was trying to visualize the experience of a visitor walking along Main Street past the paper of record in the town, and what the elements are of the design that speak to that reinforce that quality. Likewise, I found myself thinking about that above grade walkway in the design, and wondered if that was an element that was intended to reinforce that sort of metropolitan feel, for lack of a better architectural term, with respect to the center of town. And since we don't have too many of those in Half Moon Bay, I just wondered if there was some design constraint related again to the soils that makes it more or less amenable at that location, or whether that's something that can always be engineered around if you throw enough money at it.
I'm going to defer to the architect and the engineer on that when they get their chance. I think they could do a better job than I can of explaining what their thinking was when they included that in the design.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Let's see, with the current version of, I think we're in cycle 5, if memory serves, of the housing element right now. And I wondered about where these units fit with respect to our targets, if they were to be built as they're proposed in the current design. Are we hitting an area where we're short? Is an area where we're already long? Do we have a sense of that?
I think that's Jill's turf. Just in general, rental apartments would be considered a good thing from attaining housing goals.
Right. And I appreciated the ADU question. I think Commissioner Gorn picked that up. I was interested in the JDU question on that. And in a situation like this, where we're contemplating parking exceptions, what is your thinking about how we, as we consider whether a parking exception might be appropriate here, even under the new code? Is your sense that although the intention of the space on the ground floor has a retail quality, that we manage the risk that it becomes commercial? Because you mentioned, I'm sorry, I think I got those reversed. If we operate with, if the intention right now is that we're going to have something that doesn't demand much parking, do we need to allow for the possibility of, the proverbial restaurant in our thinking about this? Or, what is your framework that you suggest that we adopt in trying to integrate the uncertain uses at the bottom that could be more demanding for parking with the relatively more formulaic descriptions of what happens on the top?
The short answer is, what I would like to see is if we, just because of the moving pieces, not even assuming that a big restaurant comes in, maybe we come up a couple, 2 or 3 spaces short of where we thought we would be. I guess my question is that something that Planning Commission is generally comfortable with? And would they say we can approve a parking exception that has a little bit of flexibility into it, where the community development director could review it and say it's okay? Or if it's more than 5 spaces, does that come back to the Planning Commission with a parking plan and a formal, parking exception to deal with that? One thing to remember is during this approval, it's discretionary and you have the authority to make it easier or harder. One thing to keep in mind is under our zoning ordinance for existing businesses, if they change the type of business or the intensity of use, and it qualifies as a visitor serving business, they don't have to provide any additional parking. So arguably, what's fair or not fair, I don't know. But I think that's one thing to consider. Like I said, we're not going to get an answer tonight, but sort of what level of uncertainty is the Planning Commission comfortable with? What level of review would you want in the future? Somebody shows up with a great restaurant that everybody's in love with. Do we tell them no, or do we tell them let's go back to the Planning Commission? I think those are all important considerations.
Okay, I think I'll soak that in. I see Rick has his hands up, so I'll step aside and leave room for someone else. Thank
Through the chair, before we move on,
Yes.
thank you. I just wanted to touch on the housing element Rena question, and then to reinforce Doug's answer about parking with a few more ideas for the commission to think about while they're discussing later tonight. For the housing element, as Doug said, these would be rental units, which typically are going to come in at probably moderate income level. They are not going to be lower than that. The applicant isn't proposing affordable housing in the very lower or low income levels. The city's BMR ordinance does not require that any of these units be specifically deed restricted affordable to any particular income level. That said, there is no affordability level, including market rate, for which the city has overdeveloped according to our RENA. There's every class of housing is something that is fulfilling RENA still in this cycle 5 that we're in. We can provide you more information about that when this comes back. It is not, interestingly, it is not mapped as a housing element site, and I'm not sure why. It doesn't mean it isn't an eligible and appropriate site for developing housing. It's certainly consistent with the commercial downtown zoning and the intention of land use plan policy for focusing development in the town center, including residential, mixed use, et cetera. Back to parking, in addition to what Doug suggested about this, and thinking about, well, when this comes to you, if you were considering a parking exception, and being able to condition such exception under different circumstances, you could certainly do that. Also remember, and this is something I know Commissioner Gordon wasn't here when we worked on this code, but with I'm happy to go through this with you sometime. When the new parking code came in, it includes findings that are intended to not lock the commission in, but to give some guidance for when parking exceptions may be appropriate. And the kinds of things that the commission is going to be looking at right out of the zoning code is that this historic resource consideration, and that's already on the property, as well as amenities and things that are required to meet findings should the commission entertain them, such as provision of public improvements that help alternate modes of circulation or greener transportation, like EV chargers for the public, things like that. So you have a lot of structure around this for hopefully helping you make decisions about parking exceptions should they come your way.
Thank you, Jill. Commissioner Hernandez?
Thank you, Chairman Reddick. All very illuminating. So just to summarize what I've heard, the use of a restaurant at this site is not foreclosed, and we have the flexibility at a future date to review changes to a restaurant if that was so proposed for this design. But if we approve a project in the future and somebody puts a restaurant in replacement to a retail business, because it's visitors serving, there wouldn't be an obligation to build more parking. I'll pause there because I just said a whole mouthful, and ask for clarification on that point. So Doug, do you want to take a crack at that?
I think under just a straight reading of the zoning code, that's correct. Like I said, where Jill was going with this amended zoning code for just the historic Main Street area, I think the Planning Commission has a fair amount of discretion, and that you could put conditions on this approval that would limit that potential to just put in a restaurant without going through any additional review. We probably want to, I think it'll be the first time we really dug into that one. We probably want to put our heads together with the city attorney and just make sure that we're not wrong.
Okay. Fair enough. We never want to be wrong. It's always a good place. So I read the memo. Thank you for answering the questions. I appreciate that. One of the questions I want to just put into the public's mind here is, there's a question of why isn't there an elevator on these structures? And then there's a corresponding question I have. Well, I'll just start with why doesn't this three-story building require, these two three-story buildings require an elevator?
Well, I'm not a building code expert, but as I understand it, after talking to our building code experts, when this was a larger project, it exceeded the number of residential units, and that would have triggered additional requirements. And so if you go way back, the earlier proposals, it did include an elevator in the corner building. And then I think, I'm not sure about the other building, the elevated thing with the 10 or whatever apartments. But as it got reduced down to 6 units, the requirement to put it in went away because they can meet for the number of accessible units they need, they can do that with the ground floor units on Kelly. So to meet the minimum ADA standards, they don't need an elevator today. Whether there should be one or not, that's another question, but just from a building code and ADA standard, it's not required.
So I want to get down in the weeds. On the southwestern side of the parking lot, you have a sidewalk to nowhere. So there's this 15-foot strip of sidewalk that's surrounded by wall, fence, and there's a handicap access parking spot there, but it's perplexing to me why you would put a sidewalk there. And while we're talking about that particular piece of the parking lot, I'm curious as to why you have this humongous dead space between the dumpster and the rumble strips. It seems like you've taken a parking spot away, but you haven't really thought carefully. We haven't really thought carefully around that dead space. Is that usable space by the applicant? Could they choose to extend the walkway, make this a patio area? It just seems like a complete waste of space.
So are you talking about the dumpster over in the location by Kelly at this point? Are you talking about when they push the dumpster out of behind that roll-up door out to Kelly? Presumably there'd be some sort of curb cut there, kind of like there is at Cafe Society.
No. So what I'm talking about is on the Paseo. When the Paseo goes from Main Street to the parking lot, the sidewalk terminates with a rumble strip. To the south of that, there's another rumble strip. To the, get my direction straight here, to the north of the rumble strip, there's where you have looks like a dumpster space. And so in between those two rumble strips and where you have the dumpster, you've got this, what looks like half a dead parking space that you didn't know what to do with. And so my question is, on that parking spot, is there something that prevents the applicant from using that space, like putting it to good use, making it part of the sidewalk? And then the second question is, right in that area there's the sidewalk to nowhere. Is there a reason why you have to have that sidewalk there? Or just, again, it seems like you're putting in place infrastructure that's not necessary and maybe limiting usable space or livable space on the downstairs unit, which is already challenged. So I'm trying to figure out why you have to have a sidewalk right there.
Well, I think it may be best to dig into this one in a little bit. I think when we have the site plan in front of us and everybody knows what we're looking at, and then also the architect is online and he can talk about did they have to put it in for ADA clear path to the handicap space, or is there a reason for it, or is it just sort of left over from an earlier design? I don't know what the answer is, but I think we could, if we wait a little bit, we can get into that later this evening and get the architect's input and sort it out.
Okay, thank you. I had another question I asked, which I think you've answered again in the memo, just to put it in the sort of the record here. I had questions about the ADA accessibility for the downstairs unit. You're trying to classify it as ADA. What I understand from the memo, so my questions were twofold. One, is it going to be ADA accessible to the front door? The answer is you'll make sure the geometry, the design, the floor leveling all works for wheelchair accessibility. That's the answer I read. The second point is the bathrooms on the two units downstairs will be designed in such a way that if you do make them ADA compliant, then you can do that. You can retrofit it, but it may not be ADA compliant as laid out in the plans we see before us today. Is that fair?
Well, yes and no. One thing, when we sent this to our building official, the plan checker consultant we use, they had some comments on that, and they didn't say it was or wasn't. They wanted additional details on dimensions, what was the width, what was the turning area for wheelchairs. So all of that has been requested, and we need to get that on plans and get it in front of them. As far as the restrooms go, some things can be retrofitted, but the basic floor area where you have the room to maneuver a wheelchair, to get in and out of the wheelchair, that's something it has to be baked into the floor area right up front. Where the ADA laws do give some flexibility is you don't necessarily have to put the handrails, the grab rails on the wall right up front. You do have to build the walls so that it's really a simple matter to just bolt them on. The bracing is already installed behind the sheetrock so that you don't have to tear the place up to do it.
Yeah, so I get that. You mentioned that earlier, but the point I'm getting at is, can a wheelchair fit in? And what I heard was, we're not sure, we're going to find out. And if they're applying for, this is an ADA project, you'll make sure that that happens. That's basically what I just wanted to get into the discussion. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. I've got one more question, but I can't quite articulate it just yet. So I'm going to defer to my colleagues while I figure out how to say what it is I want to say.
Fair enough. Vice Chair Polgar.
Thank you. I just had a couple questions. One is, I see that there are bike bollards. Are there, and those are along Main Street, it looks like. And I wondered if there is any other bike storage or any other bike locations, parking, I guess, I don't know if that's the right term, associated with the design as of yet.
There is, under our code, they have to provide better quality bike storage for the tenants, like bike lockers, that sort of thing. So there is something shown on the plans for bike lockers. We haven't really fleshed out sort of the design of it, the size, that sort of thing, but that's required under our zoning code for the tenants. They're also under the code, you do have to provide for commercial uses a certain number of bike rack spaces based on the square footage and that sort of thing. So they do have to meet all of that. At this point, I don't know if they're proposing anything beyond that or not. The applicant can chime in on that. I will say on the bollards, there were some details in one of the plan sheets. It's a nice design. My experience is that when somebody is required to put in bike racks, it's a last minute thing and they buy these crappy ones that don't work and the contractor just puts it in some out of the way place where nobody can use it. These do seem to be more usable, some more thought, some more money. I think we can sort of fine tune the locations of them, but I think they're on the right path.
Yeah, no, I definitely saw where the bollards were. I was more interested in where are the bike storage for the residents. I didn't actually see that on the plans.
We've been through so many versions. I'm not sure. I know at one point they were over on the north side of the parking lot. They may have moved. I tell you the truth, I'm not sure. The most current plans we just got last week, and I haven't dug into that detail yet.
Okay, and then another question or two other questions. One is, In the parking area, on the along the north side of the parking area towards the east, there's a large area that it clearly has it has 4 trees and a little kind of what looks like maybe it's planter boxes. I'm not sure. Is that existing right now?
Right now, that site has been scraped clean.
Okay, so that's not those would be proposed for planting.
Yeah.
And that area, it's just it looks like it's kind of a fenced off area. I wasn't really clear what it was. Like there were the trees, and then I wasn't clear if it was like a fenced off area around those trees.
Which end of the parking lot are you on?
Maybe I'm, let's see. So we're looking at the parking lot. We're looking along the north side of the parking lot towards the east side. Kind of, it runs, it's a strip that, I guess it's a landscape strip, it says, like
There's
that's
a bioswale there. It's part of the
okay, it's part of the, okay, great. I just want to understand what that was, because it looked a little bit like it was a fenced off area, and I wasn't quite understanding that. And then another thing that I wanted to understand is I didn't see what's the width of the paseo as it's currently drawn.
10 feet from wall to wall.
Okay, and just for clarity, do you know what that's fine. So it's 10 feet. Okay. And then those are all my questions, my clarifying questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Chair Polgar. Commissioner Benjamin.
Thank you, Chair Reddick, but you've been very patient. If you wanted to take a round, I'll be glad to step back and let you ask questions.
Well, thank you for that, but you forge ahead, please.
Very good. So I just was reviewing the late memo, and I saw the reference, the question and answer with respect to EV chargers, the public comment about the ones that are out there being slow, and this would be maybe a level 2 charger, and they were hoping for some grant funding. And I just thought I ought to circle back so I understand the comment. Are the slow chargers they're talking about the J1772s that are in place right now, or is it something different?
I don't know. That was Commissioner Hernandez, and I think he's referring to the ones that the city has on the sidewalks, but there could be other ones in parking lots.
I asked, I was referring specific in my questions to city staff. I was specifically talking about the chargers on Kelly along Main Street, on the properties just off of Main Street, that were recently installed as a result of projects. In my nerddom and spare time, I've taken my Tesla around and tried charging at all of those locations. And I don't know the particular engineering standard. You're well versed in those details, Jimmy, but I can just tell you from a consumer experience perspective, it's a little slow. So we should it's not maybe necessary for this project. I think the bigger point you brought up, Doug, is we don't have a standard, and we should probably adopt one pretty quickly, because these projects keep coming before us and we keep saying, put it in an EV charger. But if it doesn't actually help somebody, then when they want to get their car charged, then it's not meeting the public need, and it's not worth putting one in if it takes 27 hours to charge your car.
So through the chair. So thank you for the answer. I think you're right that it would be easy to go into the weeds here and get maybe beyond what we've agendized, but I think there's an interesting idea here where the use case for a charger downtown is that the visualization is that someone would come and be there for a relatively short time, and we want them to get the high density charge, in contrast to other areas, say at the beach, where someone comes and they're going to be there all day, and maybe they can afford to be a little more leisurely at the rate that they charge. So I think there is some insight to be had there. Maybe that's a subject for future discussion, but I appreciate the nuance there. Another question that's right at the edge of the study session topics, because we can talk about the designs that we like and then the ramifications flow through, is that the proposal does involve a subdivision of an existing unified parcel. And pursuant to our current code, as of a month ago, less than a month ago, I wonder what the ramifications are with respect to the retirement of building entitlements elsewhere in the city. Does someone have a bird?
Sorry, I have a family member reaching out to me while I'm on the call. I'll put myself on mute.
All good. Thank you.
I don't have a complete answer for you. Jill, city attorney, were more involved in drafting that language for the LCP. They may be able to chime in. I don't know if we'll have a totally clear answer tonight.
Yeah, and I'm not sure we have to have one now, because the design can be what the design can be, and then this sort of flows out of that. But if there's an answer for things like that, it's interesting to know.
Well, it's a good point, and frankly, the applicant should know what that answer is sooner rather than later. So I think it is something we need to delve into.
Thank you.
I'm thinking that we ought to move on to hear from the applicant's team if it suits the commission. Are we happy with our clarifying questions and answers?
That was certainly the end of what I wanted to ask about tonight. Thank you.
Thanks. So Bridget, if you if we know, do we need the applicant's team members to raise a hand or something if they want to be admitted?
I just admitted Tony Uccelli, who's the applicant.
Great,
And then
thank
I
you.
think he'll advise me to move the rest of the gang.
Very good.
Okay, I'm sorry, I got bounced out right when I think you were bringing me in. So am I on now with the commission, everybody?
Yes, you're over. Yeah, you're here.
Okay, hey, everybody, Tony Uccelli. Sorry, it's after an hour and 20 minutes and hearing all these things that I want to answer you guys on and not having the chance to do it until now. It's a little difficult at times. I'm gonna thank you all for being on the call here and taking the time so that we can try and present this project to you. I had some presented remarks, but I'm gonna try and modify them on the fly here due to time and also due to the fact of how much has been discussed. I do want to stress the fact that, as Doug had mentioned, that we have worked at this project for over a couple of years now. That I was introduced to the Cardoni family to try and work on this project. They have tried. There had been attempts to develop this site numerous times over the last couple of years. So we've been trying to work together, put together a plan where they were, they wanted to keep their existing building, but also come up with a strategy where we could develop the corner and come out with a joint project that worked for everybody down the road. Again, I'm gonna modify some of what I was gonna say here because I want to address some of the questions, or try at least on some levels. There's been questions regarding some of the elevator, ADA. There's not an elevator, if I can remember correctly. Again, we're 2 years in, but I'm very confident that there's no elevator required because we have the ground floor units on Kelly. So because of the fact that there are the ground floor ADA compliant, I know one of the commissioners, Hernandez, you have some questions justified on that, where we have to make sure that if they're a quote unquote adaptable, that they have enough sizes so that they can be properly adapted. But as long as those units themselves meet ADA, that's why we do not need the elevator up to the second story to get up to the 4 apartments that are upstairs on the second landing. I'm just going to jump around actually to address a couple questions there, and then I'm going to let Ed jump in. The Paseo is 12 feet wide. I think it's important to know what we have over there. One of the commissioners, the bike locker you had mentioned, it is right now, it does show in the back parking lot. Again, I'm jumping around, guys, but again, that's when I have all these notes here after listening to the back and forth. I do want to talk a little bit about the design that we ended up with. The first floor units, I know that there have been some questions regarding amenities or light, et cetera, in those. You know, they're ground floor units, so there is some give take along with what we can have window wise. But I think that the affordability and the desirability of 1-bedroom apartments greatly outweigh, and I think they'll be in very high desire and meet needs for prospective tenants. The upstairs units, we're trying to, you know, we've got the townhouse style look for those 4 units. They're going to be very nice units. I mean, I don't know every unit in Half Moon Bay probably as well as I should, but I know they were going to be some of the nicest units in town. And my hope, quite frankly, I have quite a few other properties, and I'm very fair on rents with my tenants. I have tenants 10, 15, 20 years. I try and be very fair in rents. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm also trying to construct these apartments down the road so that I can still be very fair in rent and be, you know, I'm usually about 20% under market with what I charge for my tenants. So it's all a work in progress trying to make this whole thing work at the end. So I got to state that fact. And again, I'm trying to hit a few points. I do want to talk about the commercial unit because we talked quite a bit about the use and the use and the parking with that. My understanding from talking with Jill and Doug was kind of where we kind of left the topic, that, you know, it's going to have to be a retail use to start. I'm going to probably need some sort of parking, you know, exception from you guys to start this, although I'm probably only 2 or 3 spaces short. And that doesn't include, again, if I get concessions for the gas station, you know, going with parking stalls once that station was closed. But, you know, but down the road, I always assume that there would be, you know, if we did get a great tenant, we could come to you, but I would have to get your approvals if we wanted to up the type of use that could be. But I was good with the concept of that I would be restricted to a retail use for that unit unless I came back to you later and got an exception at that point down the road. So, I mean, with that, I'm comfortable with that it would be a strict retail use unless you guys later on approve something because somebody came up with a great plan and we all brainstormed together, how do we figure out the parking? But I wouldn't backdoor you guys. And that's not how this was presented, and that's not how we would do it. I'm trying to think of a couple other things that I saw, a couple other questions you had. One of the commissioners brought up the question of why we got rid of the landing or the mezzanine for the back. And quite frankly, just the feedback we got from the architect committee, as well as maybe what we were afraid from the Johnson Street residents, I just figured it wasn't worth the 10-year fight. I just didn't want to do it. So I just figured it made more sense to cut the project down, put the density on the corner and go from there. So that was why it wasn't a case of, well, you know, structurally, is it okay? I just figured that basically the original project was too big for what a lot of the stakeholders might want. I guess I'll probably leave it at that for now. Again, I tried to really edit my remarks on the fly to you guys. And I really think it probably would be good for Ed to come in and talk about some of your architectural questions that you might have, especially he can probably speak best on the ADA, on where we sit on that on those ground floor units.
Well, thank you, sir. We appreciate your time and insights. And we'd be happy to hear from Ed next.
Through the chair, can I just ask one quick suggestion?
Yes, Commissioner Hernandez.
If the esteemed Mr. Ed Love is going to present to us, I'd like to kind of elevate the conversation a little bit if we can. We're getting into some tactical details. I'd like to understand the big picture thinking around this project from Mr. Love's perspective.
Doug.
Welcome, Mr. Love.
Thank you.
Really? Really?
Sorry about the dogs.
It's my dog's fault. I apologize. She started barking and she set your dogs up.
Where should we start? I mean, everybody, some of the questions were answered. Why don't I jump into, well, Rick, you wondered about the big picture. Could you expand on that a little bit and tell me a little bit more about what you're thinking about?
Through the chair, may I?
Yes, please, Commissioner Hernandez.
This is a prominent building in an important location. And I think you're very familiar with the downtown neighborhood and the look and the feel. I'm trying to understand from looking at the detailed plans, and I got a chance to look at full-size plans yesterday. So I've got a perspective of what this iteration of the project looks like. I'm trying to understand how you think this fits into the downtown, the approach you're taking with this particular design. And I know you've been confronted with many challenges through the review process. I'm just trying to understand your thinking from how this fits into the character of downtown, the surrounding neighborhood, the design of the old town, how you integrate that in. Because I'm having some challenges seeing that right now in the current design that we have in front of us.
Wow. Wow.
Okay. And a lot of thought went into it. And probably one of the first things was, what would you like, what should be the look of the building? So at the same time, have some historical integrity. I decided, and planning staff seemed to agree, we talked about it quite a bit very early on. A modern building maybe wouldn't fit in. And so I suggested maybe a modern Mediterranean style of a building that doesn't try to mimic exactly a real Mediterranean building, but at the same time is a modern building. So two of my favorite buildings on Main Street are the Half Moon Bay Inn with its Italia downstairs, right around the corner from my office, and Bartolucci's building on Main Street in Correios. And both of them are sort of Mediterranean. And I think it's a good look. It blends in. It echoes those two buildings a little bit. It's certainly traditional with the Mediterranean history of Half Moon Bay, Portuguese, Italian, etc. So that was the thinking about the look of the building. To maximize the yield of the building, we went to 3 stories with the retail commercial on the ground floor and 2 townhouses upstairs, with the living areas of the townhouses being on the 2nd floor and the bedroom floor being up on the 3rd floor. Building number 2, which is what we call the building down on Kelly Street, that's more of strictly residential. And the thinking behind that one was, well, let's kind of mimic maybe a little bit a traditional San Francisco building with the bay windows facing out on Kelly. but keep it lower as we're stepping back on Kelly towards the residential neighborhood to the east. So those are kind of the big concepts behind the overall design.
Thank you.
Mr. Love, are there any other questions that the commissioners have asked since the start of the meeting that you have the answers to?
Yeah, let me go into the ADA thing, because that was obviously something that a number of the commissioners were concerned about. The ADA requirements are included in the California building codes. And the building codes address that in chapter 11 of the building code. And chapter 11 has two parts, 11A and 11B. This is all kind of esoteric stuff, but it's the background and it's the background as to how we got where we are now. 11A covers buildings that are not publicly funded, buildings that are privately funded. And the requirements for privately funded buildings are not quite as stringent as the requirements for public buildings, which are covered in chapter 11B. Now, we're all used to going into restaurants and seeing very roomy areas, lots of room, lots of floor area. That's 11B because that's commercial. But 11A covers, like I said, privately funded residences. And when you delve into it further, if there's 8 or less units, then that allows the units on the ground floor to be adaptable. And adaptable means you have a clear path of travel through the unit, and the bathrooms and the kitchens have certain clearances that are required. The hallways have to be 36 inches wide. The doorways have to be 32 inches in the clear. We make them a little larger than that. We'll make 36 inches. There's only 2 doors in each one. There's a door to the bedroom and a door to the bathroom. On your plans, I think those plans show swinging doors. We have an ADA consultant, and that ADA consultant has suggested that those be pocket doors because the door swings tend to get in the way of people and wheelchairs. And I've been in a wheelchair twice, so I'm well aware of what it takes. And I have a better understanding of obstacles for wheelchairs now that that's happened. And so the doors to the bathroom and the bedroom will be pocket doors, which he suggested. So we make the corridors 36 or 36 and a half inches wide, 3.5 feet wide, and we have the 3-foot door openings. And you can roll right in from the street in a wheelchair. And so there'll be very good units for a senior, a single person, possibly even a couple. The other 4 units are roomier. They're all 2 bedrooms with an office. So offices are obviously very important these days with COVID times and will be very important in the future. I don't think any of us know how many people are going to stay home and keep working as they've been working for the last year or more. And how many are going to go back to the office? I don't know. But there's an office in each one of those 4 units for the work at home people. I think Sarah asked about a bike locker, and there is a bike locker on the north side of the parking lot that will handle 4 bikes. And that complies with the zoning ordinance. I've forgotten exactly what the ratio is, but I think it's actually one bike locker maybe for every 3 units. So we've got 4 of them in there. And then the bollards along the street, you asked about that. There's 2 in front of the Kelly building, building 1. There's 2 on the Kelly side of the commercial space. And there's 2 more on Main Street, on the Main Street side of the commercial space. For a total of 6. And there could be more. And I've always liked the ones that are installed that look like a bicycle that we have on Main Street in a couple places. But these are just bollards that don't take up as much room, but you can still lock up a bike to them. I'm going over my notes. Maybe I don't have every question answered. Bike locker. Well, any other questions that I didn't address?
Should we, well, let's take advantage of having Mr. Uccelli and Mr. Love here to answer questions. Commissioner Benjamin.
Yes, thank you. And good evening, Ed. I had a couple of questions earlier that Doug suggested that I bring over to you. One of them was in conjunction with the rehabilitation of the soils after the gas station closed, and I understand that it's got a clean bill of health. I also noticed in the history that at one point there was some talk about parking underground. We're not doing that, and I'm not asking why we aren't doing that. That's fine, but I wondered if there was additional use of subgrade development that had been considered, whether it's a wine cellar or storage or I don't know what. And maybe it's entirely inappropriate, it doesn't fit the design, but I was particularly interested initially in whether there was some aspect of the rehabilitation that limited our ability to do that, or that was just something that didn't work economically.
Well, building basements is very expensive and they can flood. The water table is low enough to allow it, according to the sales report, and they could go in, but it's not something I don't think that would add to the project very much. You certainly couldn't have on this particular site underground parking by the time you got the ramps in and turning distances and aisles, and there's just not enough room for underground parking.
Yeah, I was going to comment on that if it were there. So I'm glad even I understood that. So I mean,
it was tricky enough to get the 15 spots in the parking lot on the surface without having, you'd probably have a ramp going down that would take up half of that parking lot. So
it was a storage related question, not a parking question.
Okay.
Then I was also interested in the seismic implications for that elevated walkway. And I wondered about, we don't see a lot of those elsewhere in town. I'm trying to think of any actually that are elsewhere in town. And I'm wondering, from a safety standpoint, what we're giving up in order to get structural stability there, if anything, or if it's just that Mr. Uccelli is going to throw some money at that.
Well, the only elevated walkway now is the bridge between the 2 buildings, and I think that's only 6 feet long.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I was just visualizing, I'm not a structural engineer. I'm not suggesting that that's not perfectly fine. I just didn't know what the trade-offs were that made that feasible versus not having it. And from a point of view of architectural appeal, my sense was maybe that spoke to the gravitas of being that close to the beating heart of the city, that there was somehow a sort of metropolitan quality to a walkway like that. Although at 6 feet, it's kind of an abbreviated metropolitan quality, I suppose.
Yeah, the very practical reason would the stairway, they could get up to the second level, which is access to the 4 townhouses at the second level. The stairway is in the rear of the commercial building. So you would go up that stairway and have direct access to the 2 units over the retail, over the commercial, and then cross the bridge to the 2 units over on the other building, building number 2. So it's just a matter of access.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that suggests a certain commuting quality to the spaces in that upper area. That's interesting to me.
Right.
So, all right, then.
I'm always reminded of another wonderful project is Embarcadero Center in the city, which has a lot of bridges and a lot of outdoor walkways. That's a wonderful project. So this is borrowing from that and taking it to a very low scale, of course.
The sincerest form of flattery. So if you were on the sidewalk sort of next to downtown, if you were tapping on the window at Director Ekas's office and you turned around to admire the view, I was trying to visualize how the proposal looking out sort of towards Main Street, what it's going to feel like relative to other sections of town, and what are the qualities of that facade that you feel are bringing us an enhanced heart of downtown, if you follow the question.
Well, if you're standing by Jill's window, which I've done and I tapped on, as you mentioned.
Who hasn't, really?
Yeah. And you look towards Main Street, you'll see the Kelly Street side of the commercial building, which has the nicely arched windows and the chamfered corner right at the corner. And the windows, the configuration of the windows, I'll throw this in. There's a very practical function on those windows. The central portion of each one of those windows is approximately 3 feet by 7 feet. So if the commercial space does get divided up into possibly 2 or 3 different shops, a door could very easily be placed in that 3 by 7 foot opening in the window, allowing direct access off the street rather than have people come in and have corridors or a vestibule inside. That's all up, but maybe that would be the choice, would be to come in and have a vestibule inside, sort of like La Piazza is, perhaps, if you've been in there. But there's always the possibility of having a doorway directly onto the street.
Right, optionality is always a good. Okay, I think you've answered the questions that that come to. Thank you for your forbearance.
Go to Vice Chair Polgar.
Thank you, Chair Reddick. So my question is hopefully a really quick, easy one and quick one to answer. It has to do with the windows on the ground floor units in the eastern building. If you're inside, at what height do those windows start? The ones that are higher up. I know there's an egress window.
That's a tricky area, and we discussed that a whole bunch. When you're in an urban setting like that, and we're right up against a residential lot, there's an issue, obviously, of privacy, in both directions. It's people in the building looking out at other people outside, and people outside the building looking in. So the high windows in the unit, I think the window sills are at 5.5 feet. I don't know, I'd have to look at an interior elevation of about 5.5 feet.
Okay.
So you wouldn't be able to look out of them directly, but it would bring light into the bedrooms and the living room, I think, on the east and west sides.
Thank you. That was my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Hernandez.
Thank you. I had some very down the weeds questions that Doug wasn't sure exactly how to answer, so I'll throw them to you, Ed.
Thanks.
Well, you may have specific answers to them. In the parking lot, I've seen the previous iteration of the project from about 14 years ago and how they approach parking. I think you've done some really smart things with the parking lot approach, for sure. My question was, if you look at the Paseo and how it enters the parking lot, you've got what effectively looks like a dead space, half a dead parking spot between the, where you've put the dumpsters and those two little paths there. Is there something that's constraining you from turning that into a full patio, just instead of putting the rumble strips there? And then the second question directly related to that is, there's this sidewalk to nowhere, which is adjoining that space. And I look at that and I think, gosh, that could be livable space for the residents on the first floor. That could be a garden space if it's walled in or fenced in. Help me understand the thinking around that little natty detail, if you will.
Yeah, the area right at the corner where the Paseo comes into the parking lot, you see the handicapped no parking area with the slashes, the diagonal lines in it. And the dumpster is there, and that dumpster is for the building at 433, 435. And the dumpsters have to be pulled out of the dumpster enclosure in order to be picked up. The parking lot is too crowded to bring the Republic trucks directly in. If somebody was parked in the handicap lot, they wouldn't be able to get to it. So right across from my office, it's Italia has a garage with the dumpsters in the garage, and 2 or 3 times a week, those people at the end of the day pull the dumpsters out of the garage so that late at night or early in the morning, the trucks can come with their forks and actually pick up the dumpsters and dump them into the back of the trucks.
Yeah, I get that. What I'm getting at is, I think Jill's just shared the screen here in front of us. So the viewers who haven't memorized the details of your plan can follow from home. I'm just looking at that, the spot where you're not going to roll the dumpster out, in between the blue painted lines and the rumble strip. It looks like you've got about a 6 foot by 12 foot or a 12 foot by 12 foot space that's completely wasted. And so is there something prohibiting you from using that 12 foot, again, eyeballing it, 12 foot by 12 foot space where it looks like there may have been a parking spot there before?
Well, there probably was one there before, and we took it out. I'm not sure exactly why, but just to have a little more room for pedestrians to walk in and out of the Paseo into the parking lot. People can park in the parking lot and walk out through the Paseo to Main Street, or walk out through the walkway underneath the bridge out to Kelly, and vice versa. So it's just a little roomier space and not so cramped in. And I guess it could be used for something, but we're just trying to keep it kind of wide open and spacious. Probably
Okay,
the best reason.
if it's just asphalt, it doesn't seem like it's really a good use. And then going to the sidewalk to nowhere, there may be a reason why you're putting that there, but there's a sidewalk between the blue parking strip that Jill's highlighting in the screen here. It just seems like I don't see any purpose for this. And again, you're cutting into your livable space, your usable space for the building, garden space potentially for the residents. do you really need that there? Is there something in the code that requires you to use that in that manner?
No, there's an EV spot at the right, at the eastern end of that. So again, it's just a path for somebody to walk because cars are going to be parked right up against it with their bumpers, right at the curb line.
But I mean, that only covers 3 parking spots. You've got another, whatever it is, 12 parking spots that don't have that because there's a fence right there. So I don't, yeah, and I don't need to, like, my message to you is, gosh, you got a lot of space to work with. And I know everybody's going through iterations on these things. I'm just, unless there's some specific reason why you have to have that there, I just, I worry about, we create a housing unit for somebody on the first floor and, it's already a little cramped. What could we do to make that a more amenable space, right? It doesn't just drive a higher rent, it makes it a more livable space for the people who live there. And then that was it. That's the nature of my question. And then same thing for that little dead space in the parking lot. If you could, if a restaurant ends up being in this location, having a more formal extension of the patio and then starting the rumble strips a little, further out from the building structure doesn't really make a big difference from a project perspective, but it makes a big difference if you're running a restaurant and you need to put an extra 1 or 2 tables there. So it just, even if it's not a table, it's just, it could make a more cohesive feel. That was the only, that's where I was going, Ed. And yeah.
Well, we could certainly take a look at that because I wouldn't mind adding 3 more feet to that, to the 2 units on the ground there facing Kelly. Yeah, we'll take a look at both of those things and discuss it with Jill and with Tony and Doug, and maybe we can utilize them.
And again,
Winter has her hand up. I'd like to give her a chance to.
Oh, please.
Thanks. Thank you.
I just wanted to pipe up and say, I think we're still sort of in the realm of clarifying questions, not quite to deliberations yet. And so just a little yellow light from your deputy city attorney to remember we haven't heard from the rest of the public yet.
Thank you for that, Winter. I think in the spirit of that, unless there are true clarifying questions remaining, let's invite members of the public in attendance to, if they wish, to raise their hands and address the commission.
I'm seeing one. I have a Richard Lottie.
Well, in that case, I will open the public hearing. Welcome, Mr. Lottie.
There you are.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to join this meeting and listen to the dialogue. I am a citizen of Half Moon Bay, and I am a member of the Coastal Recovery Initiative. I'm on Team Vibrant. And since this was a downtown project, I thought it might be educational for me to listen in. My question relates to the fact that this is a joint development project between existing historical building and 2 new construction buildings. As Doug mentioned early on, the historical building's been vacant for a number of years, is currently under some form of remodeling. Is there a possibility for the city planning commission to incorporate the needs for that historic building in conjunction with the new construction? We often see developer projects be requested to accommodate other issues in the community, and clearly the historic building, I guess it's 435 Main, has been less than a attractive feature of downtown Half Moon Bay for a number of years.
Well, I suspect that Mr. Garrison said all that's appropriate in his presentation about that property. I don't know if city staff would like to have further conversations either now or offline with Mr. Lottie about that.
I'd be happy to speak with Mr. Lottie. He and I have discussed a few things in the past, and it's really great. He's volunteering his time on the recovery initiative, and I had the pleasure of taking a downtown tour with him. So I can go over the building permit status for the existing building, and he knows where I live. So we'll figure that out. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Any other members of the public wishing to speak?
I'm seeing none, Mr. Chair.
All right, I'll close the public hearing. Well, what's the pleasure of the commission? We're about nearly 2 hours into the meeting. Do you want to proceed with commissioner deliberations or take a quick 5-minute break?
Could we take a 5-minute break?
For sure. Temporary recess for 5 or 6 minutes. Thank you. questions on the subject of the study session. Commissioner Benjamin.
Okay, thank you. So this was an interesting conversation. I feel like I always learn a lot from my colleagues and appreciate the insights I get from staff about what the underlying issues are. So I want to pick up a couple of them that I heard and offer my reactions as red meat for the rest of you to tear down or bake, whatever it is that has to happen to it. The first was with respect to parking. I believe that if there is a reasonable possibility that the downstairs area will become a higher demand parking area, I think the idea that a visitor serving commercial use wouldn't be subject to discretion means that we have to think about it now. And while we may not want to ask for the parking spaces now, perhaps we need a contingency that will allow us to get them later. Or I'm not obsessed with getting parking spaces down to 5 decibels as required in the plan. But maybe we need some contingency if we're going to have some future parking structure that would be appealing to me. Or maybe some facility for demand-based parking, which also might appeal, that would move the parking around in that area to make it available for people who need to be close, who are willing to pay for the parking in close. In a related topic, the concepts that Commissioner Hernandez brought up with respect to electronic vehicle charging interested me. As I mentioned in passing, it does seem to me that our use cases in downtown aren't as well satisfied as they could be. If the goal is to provide for a way for visitors to come in and have a meal, they do need a higher level of charging than I think we're providing by and large. So I'm interested in that possibility. And segueing off of that, we did not talk about resilient power in the context of this design, and I'd like to inject that topic for consideration. There's a lot of roof space in this project, and I know that we have facilities for charging, at least one. Seems to me there could be raceways for more, and that might be nice. But in an era of increasing power failures, I wonder if some of the space might not be well disposed to some sort of battery backup, or it doesn't have to be a battery, maybe it's a generator, but something to provide resilience, especially in the case of the ADA parking facilities. There may be something in the code. This may already be reflected, but we didn't talk about it, and it seems relevant to me. I asked a couple of times about the experience of the streetscape bystander who's looking up, because the buildings do have a tall feeling to me. I appreciated Mr. Love's sloping the buildings away as you go away from Main Street to the east. But I couldn't help wondering if there was some way to further soften that impact. And I'll be the first to admit that I might have the concept completely wrong, and it's going to look just as organic as it can be. But I thought it bore mentioning. The question that Commissioner Gorn asked about whether junior ADUs could be carved out of the 2-bedroom, I appreciate that Jill was comfortable that seemed unlikely. I'm not questioning it, but I do want to understand what's going on under the hood to draw that conclusion. So this is not me doubting it. This is me professing ignorance of the mechanics that exclude it. With respect to parking, the parking exception question, one of the aspects of that I hadn't already commented on was the question about whether this project could benefit from the parking that had been created when the gas station, a couple of decades ago, had been eliminated and the curb cuts associated with cars driving up off of Main Street or Kelly to get in, whether they could claim credit for that. And I think it raises a really interesting question that's worth reflecting on, and we haven't talked much about it. Because if this had happened last year or even 2 or 3 years ago, I think it would be easier for me to see the case. What concerns me was something that's happened a long time ago, and maybe I'm just misrepresenting the time scale. Maybe it was 4 years ago. I'm thinking it was 15 years ago. But there's some period of time over which all of the other development taking place in the downtown asks for parking exceptions. And the questions that the Planning Commission makes in making findings for those exceptions are, is there enough parking that this isn't going to have a significant impact? And implicit in that is our evaluation of all of the parking that's available during that time, including those spaces that had been created when the curb cuts were eliminated. So it's not that I want to, pull out my X-Acto knife and slash out this space, but I think it's important to recognize that there's some sort of amortization of the benefits that those parking spaces have created over a period of time. And so I'm a little hesitant. Maybe this is such an unusual situation that we'll never see it again. I don't recall there being that many curb cuts in the middle of blocks downtown. So maybe the significance as a potential precedent for equal protection in some future case wouldn't be an issue, but I think it bears a little bit of thought. So those are my initial thoughts, Chair.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Gorn.
Well, that was really well said. This is a study session. We're not getting into approval or disapproval. They wanted feedback, and they definitely got feedback. I would say when I look at this project, this plan, I think it's pretty great. I think, you look at the look of it and how it blends in with the neighborhood and how it is an impressive design for that very important spot. Obviously, parking is the issue, right? That's the obvious one that was raised by staff, and you're looking for, what to do about it. I do think that you're looking at a lot of people, even if you're not looking at the visitors coming to there and parking, you're looking at the people who are the owners of the place. You're looking at 4 2-bedroom apartments and 2 1-bedroom apartments. That's a lot of people. It's like, I don't know what, I know you have a you've figured out a formula for it, but you're looking at, 15, 20 people. And it's not that it's 1 car per place or even 1.5 cars per place. Even when you have 2 people in an apartment, they usually both have cars. And so those 15 spaces are going to fill up very quickly. I personally don't have a problem with the idea of including the gas station curb as parking. I think that, when it was last used, it was a gas station and it didn't have that curbside parking. And now in this iteration, this new project, I think that you have to be able to count that parking that now, that exists with this project that didn't exist with the gas station. I just don't, I understand that it's an issue, but it seems to me that it is reasonable to say that it's new parking. However, that is going to be a topic of conversation as they say, going forward, right? When we do talk about approving this, that is going to be a big piece of it. And if you can figure out some other way to get those few more spaces, I think that that's probably a good idea. Like that would be my number one takeaway from all the, you know, suggestions so far and what to look at in the feedback is if you can get 3 or 4 or 5 more spaces, that would go a long way toward making this project viable. It looks really good to me. I really like this project personally, and I hope that that we see it again. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Commissioner Hernandez.
Thank you, Chairman Ruddick. Thank you to the applicant and Ed Love for bringing this project to us. This is an important project in a prominent location, and we need to make sure we get this right. I'm gonna, before I get into my broader comments, I'm gonna focus in on the comments that Commissioner Benjamin and Commissioner Gorn have already shared, and just sort of share my perspective. Like Commissioner Gorn, I'm more amenable to the parking interpretation based on the fact that the last time this project was used, it was a gas station, and the applicant was working on a project. It might have been 15, 16 years ago, but they were working in good faith, and they changed the curb cuts based on the expectation that they were going to be able to move forward with the project in a few years. That didn't happen for whatever reasons. So I'm amenable to the interpretation that, hey, we went from a gas station to something else, and so we should probably give them a little bit of flexibility because they've created new parking as part of this project. I also would echo the sentiment that we can find a way to make the parking space more efficient, even at the expense of some landscaping and decoration. I think that might be helpful. Landscaping is always important, and we want to make the parking lots not ugly, but there are certainly things that can be done with the parking lot with a little bit of imagination and some math that I think could make better use of the parking spot. So those are some of the sort of things that have been presented before us. I want to elevate the conversation just a little bit because we have obligations around city code and very specific things that we've got to address. We also have an obligation under the architectural review process to make a determination, does this meet the standard that we expect for a prominent building in a location like this? And I agree that Mr. Love's perspective of the Half Moon Bay Inn or the Bartolucci building are good examples of things that are that make sense for this space. If I squint really hard, I could see that. The frame is there, the massing is there. There's a lot of the Minecraft version. I have kids who play Minecraft. The Minecraft version of this project, yeah, it looks like similar to those, but it also looks similar in a Minecraft way to a Costco building with a tile roof. And so I have a hard time with this project in such a prominent location without an appropriate level of detail. It's not really like there's some articulation that can happen on this site. There's, you know, on the corner spot in particular, it's almost there. It's just all of the detail is really missing, right? We don't know what we're getting into here. The Paseo signage looks cheap and tinny in what was rendered to us. And I don't want to, I'm not attacking this project. I think it's really important that we do something here. I'm in the position where the previous applicant who went through this process, I did our houses at the same time, and my house at the same time. And so I got to see that project way back when. And we torture people when we go through these processes. And like something should be there. Something should already be there. We've foregone the tax benefits, the aesthetic appeal of having something there. So I'm really supportive of putting a project here. I think we got a lot of the core utilitarian elements sorted out. The architectural elements are fundamentally lacking. And if this came to me as a project now, there's no way I could meet the standard of the Architectural Review Committee to approve this because it's lacking. I can provide more specific detail. I'm not trying to attack this. It's lacking of detail. And I think there are elements that haven't been thought through properly. Like, what is the quality of life of the people who live in the second unit, not on the corner, right? The bottom unit seems really low. The lighting is poor. The people who are on the second and third story, they don't have a deck. They don't have access to that beautiful eastern slope of the Santa Cruz Mountains with the sun rising on it, right? They've got really tiny windows. And, you know, I would encourage the applicant to think through, how do you get rid of that sidewalk? How do you put a garden in there? How do you make this space more amenable to the residents who live there? So you can charge a higher rent or have a higher sale price if you're selling the unit outright. I'm really concerned that we're gonna we're gonna have something that's boring, uninspired, and lacking in appropriate character for such a prominent location. Now, those things may be envisioned in the future, but it's not what I see in these plans before me today. And I asked for a larger set of plans so I could look at those details, and I found that detail completely lacking in what I saw before me. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Hernandez. Vice Chair Polgar.
Thank you, Chair Reddick. So I guess my overall feel about this is, well, first of all, I'm very excited about this project. I share some of the same concerns that Commissioner Hernandez raised just now, but I will say that overall, I do feel that it's on the right track. And I will say that I appreciate, in looking back at the comments from the Architectural Advisory Committee, that the applicant has been responding through iterations to their feedback. But I do also see in their most recent comments the request for more detail in terms of the kind of the facade, and particularly some more detailing on the residential building, the eastern building. So I think that it's on its way. I perhaps maybe wasn't as concerned about some of the lacking detail at this stage, partly because I felt like some of the point of this conversation was also about the more like some of the fundamental about where things are being put. And so maybe I'm not as concerned because of that, because I feel like it's still going to have to go back to the Architectural Advisory Committee. And they have requested a lot of what Commissioner Hernandez has specifically asked for. And so I'm looking forward to seeing that in that further review. But I do want to acknowledge that I definitely saw where the applicant, as I said before, has really made an effort to respond to the feedback over time to refine this project. So I want to acknowledge that. I also agree with Commissioner Benjamin regarding a contingency or other sort of mechanism regarding the parking if it were converted, if the commercial went from being like a retail, to like a restaurant, very different parking needs. And so I strongly agree that having some sort of contingency or some mechanism from the get-go is important. I like that suggestion a lot about, and that's not something I would say is a requirement or anything. I'm just saying I liked when kind of pile on to his idea about maybe there's roof solar or something like that. I think that that's a great idea. I guess there's a couple. I also agree with Commissioner Gorn and Commissioner Hernandez regarding the credit for the parking for the curb cutout, which I think they've explained sufficiently, so I won't go into that. I have my concerns are, I think that the parking issue's been discussed sufficiently, and I've already told you kind of my thoughts on that. But I do have some concerns with respect to the reality of the space especially the space on the first floor, because I understand completely the privacy concern, but if we are truly calling this a ADA adaptable space, I can't imagine being in a wheelchair and having windows that start at 5.5 feet. I just think that is like not I just think that's an awful space to be in and to live in. So I don't think that those things are compatible. I realize it's not necessarily a requirement for building code, perhaps, because you do have the one egress window, but I just like quality of life, I can't imagine it. So I think that, and I do think that the thought about like if there's a way to avoid some of like if maybe there's a little bit of wasted space where that sidewalk is on the north side of the residential building, the eastern building, if there's a way to use that to expand the downstairs units, I'd be all for that. And I am definitely concerned about like that aspect of it. I hadn't noticed some of the issues on the second floor unit, or the second and third floor units where, but I think that the Commissioner Hernandez raises an important point about making better use perhaps of those opportunities for views and getting, having a little outdoor space for that, some more green opportunity for having like green boxes, garden boxes, et cetera. Those opportunities I would love to see in the details that come with an additional architectural advisory committee review. That's very hard for me to say at this time of night. I also very strongly feel that it would be a good idea to look if there's a possibility of moving that existing dumpster on the historic building to the north. Perhaps if there were, like, it seems like a dumpster part of the building isn't necessarily historic. So maybe it could be okay to like try some different configurations for that, because it does seem like that dumpster is supremely badly placed. Just like where it is, it's just an unfortunate location. And along those lines, I don't know what to make of the Paseo. It's, I was looking at the dimensions of that. So it's 12 feet wide, and I don't know that you're going to really grow trees so wonderfully there with the 3-story building, which, by the way, I'm fine with that. I realize it's a big, hot, tall building and all those things, but I'm down with that. I think this is good for this space, and I'm not objecting to that. I'm just saying that I don't necessarily see trees growing tremendously well in that location. It's pretty narrow. I was looking at the dimensions of the corridor that has the mural that's just like a house or two to the north. And it's like more than 18 feet wide. So I definitely don't care for the, it feels like a little bit of false advertising to have kind of a big sign that says Paseo Plaza. It's not a plaza, and I don't think it kind of doesn't fit with that. I think there's a lot that I think that needs to be worked on in terms of that area. And I question the capacity of it for it to sustain having like trees really. So especially because it's on the north side of the building, it's good. So there's a lot of issues, I think, in practical terms with that area. But I like that there's a pathway for people who park at the back to get out to the front. I'm not objecting to it. I just think that it needs redesign. And then And so, and maybe the key is to look around at some of the other spaces that have the corridors. I know there's other narrow pathways, and maybe just make it a less of a big deal. Like it's like acknowledge that it's a narrow pathway, and you're not going to have like, you know, it's not this grand plaza. But just look around and try to figure out what works. And then the bike locker. So I think that the amount of bike parking is like woefully under. I realize that the requirement is like is only for 4, but I really think that it would be really nice to see more parking for bikes that's for the residents. And maybe even more so than that, I would like to see it attached to the building, because it's going to be crappy to have to, sorry, I shouldn't have said that on a planning commission meeting, it's late, but it will be unfortunate for folks to have to walk across the parking lot in the rain to go get their bikes. And like, it's not conducive to residents using their bikes instead of cars. And so we have a space that's downtown, like, wouldn't it be nice to make it especially friendly for that? I know that I asked the question about the bollards and everybody thought I was upset about them. I'm not. I like the bollards out front. They're great. But I think the residents need a better situation for parking their bikes that's attached to the building, so that they don't have to get all wet to get out their bikes, and their bikes are very conveniently available to them. I would also say that this is an issue that I think has come up with other residential downtown, in that there's like no place for storage. And I appreciated Commissioner Benjamin asking the question about potentially doing underground. I realize that adds to the expense a lot. So that's probably, sounds like it's probably not a feasible solution or very practical for this project. But I would strongly encourage looking for ways to at least offer some more storage spaces outside or around, like incorporated in, like if you're not going to make that bigger area, like if you can't make use of that 3-foot space north that's kind of taken up by the sidewalk in along the parking lot on the north side of the residential building, maybe that could be storage space. I don't know. So I think that there's or that could be the bike storage. So I see some kind of quality, there are some quality of life issues that I see with the design currently. And I am looking forward to seeing more of the detail in the designs as well, especially around as the Architectural Advisory Committee noted, around the kind of corner of the commercial building, but also the residential building, the east side building. I think I got that right. All right, and I think those were all of my. Did I mention moving the dumpster? Yes, I did, about the historical. Yeah, get creative with that. Find out if the dumpster itself is actually historic. So.
Thank you very much. Well, if I may, I'll offer a few of my ideas. I too share a great deal of excitement that something is going to happen on that intersection. It's been it's a little bit of sadness for me every time in the last however many years it's been to walk by there and know that that's the true center of our city, and it has been vacant for far too long. So I applaud the effort of the applicant and his team to come up with a good project there. And I think a lot of the design works well. I think the site plan works well. I think the architect has done a good job on the massing. I like the promise of the Paseo. It can be a challenging space, and it seems to me that the difference has potential. The difference between a Paseo and an alleyway is probably a fine line, and you have to get the aesthetics and the landscaping to work well. But I think it'd be a great benefit to have that be a pleasant space to make it easy for folks to get from the parking lot to Main Street. I'm very much with Commissioner Hernandez on feeling that we really need to see a lot more of the architectural detail than what these renderings do give us. And perhaps it's that it's still a work in progress, and that's fine. But the renderings, they do make the buildings look a bit generic, and the buildings that Ed Love mentioned liking on Main Street, you can think of interesting detailing, artisanal features there that you would really like to see in these plans. I think that'll go a long way towards making it a successful presence right in the center of town. I may be in minority on my view of the parking situation, but we have this perpetual conflict between some of the city government's top priorities, like increasing the vibrancy of downtown, getting different forms of housing in downtown, close to transit, close to shopping. And these priorities and our efforts to fulfill them, they almost always conflict with the limitations of our parking policies. And I can't help but think that even with the more liberal parking policies that we enacted a year or two ago, that it's still, the parking policies may still not be supportive enough of these other policy priorities to work. Main Street needs to be more vibrant. We all need that. The businesses there and the residents who use Main Street need it to be more vibrant. I think if there ended up being a super popular restaurant in that commercial space, I think that would be terrific. Then the parking exceptions needed for that wouldn't bother me. I've said before, as a member of this board, that we're pretty spoiled for parking in Half Moon Bay. I'm pretty certain that 98% of the visitors who come to Main Street have a parking experience that is far superior to where they live and shop normally, unless they're coming from La Honda or Pescadero, I guess. So those are my comments. I think Commissioner Hernandez is next in line.
I want to echo the sentiments of Chairman Ruddick. I'm very much in line with his thinking on most of those things, so the aesthetics components. On the parking spot, I do think we have a natty issue there of how do we address the parking. I think that, again, most people have a superior parking experience. I'm of the opinion that maybe we need to take a look at our parking code one more time in the not too distant future, because we keep running into issues around that. But also very, very supportive of Commissioner Ruddick's, Commissioner Polgar's comments as well. A couple of other very specific things. A paseo implies that you're going somewhere interesting. A paseo at a parking lot is not a paseo. There are paseos like this in Palo Alto, in Menlo Park, I've seen in the downtown areas there, and they're just horrible. The Bartolucci building, which was brought up earlier, actually has a paseo. And it's to someplace interesting. It's to a courtyard. It looks amazing. There's interesting stuff there. There's shops, there's detail. So if you're gonna call it a paseo, give me a destination that's intriguing and interesting, a fountain, something, right? There's no fixture worth drawing me into if you're gonna call this a paseo. Couple of points. When I had the benefit of asking for and getting a set of the larger plans, so I could really look at this project from a big picture perspective. And when this comes before us again, I would encourage city staff to give us full sets of plans on this, because it's a big project and it covers a lot of space, and it really helps to get into the detail. When I look at the second story, I see a lot of dead space in between the two buildings. You got this bridge and you've got these little walkways, and it just seems like a lot of wasted space. And I think my suspicion is you're trying to avoid the cost of an elevator at the expense of like livable space for the people who are there. And so my feedback is, why don't you just bite the bullet, put the elevator in, and make more livable space for the people who are there versus trying to tiptoe around this issue. if that is in fact your thinking, because it just doesn't seem like there's an efficient use of space between the buildings. The other thing to consider is on the second and third story units on the residential side, it might make sense to flip the floor plan. I think you might, if you take a look at this, you might find a more efficient use of the space. You know, it could be much more appealing, right? And I get there's all kinds of constraints, but if you put a deck on the top floor and you put a kitchen up on the top floor, that space becomes way more interesting. And it's something to consider. I want to just, if you got a Paseo out of nowhere, maybe you consider put bike parking there, right? If you're not, you're going to have a hard time growing trees in that space, but to Commissioner Polgar's point, there's something that can be done there. I just want to reiterate, I feel like I've been very negative. My comments aren't super positive. I think this is an awesome project. I think it's a really important thing for us to do. It's a great location, super prominent. The structure, as Doug mentioned earlier, the bones of this are right. The concern that I think is being expressed is around the finishing detail. We want to see something that rises to the standard that we put current people through. If I look at other projects that I've looked at since I've been on this planning commission, we have a lot of rigor that we put people through. And even the prior applicant at this very location built a full-scale model of this project so that he could pass muster. And he ultimately didn't pass muster on it, right? So I just want to see us make sure that we're applying the right level of diligence to this project and we see the right level of detail. And I would really encourage the applicant to lean into the feedback from the Architectural Review Committee, and they're being polite, they're being delicate. Get into the nitty gritty with those folks because they really want to see this project be successful as much as we do.
Thank you again. And Vice Chair Polgar.
Thank you, Chair Reddick. I just wanted to say that I really appreciated your comments, Chair Reddick, and I wanted to agree with that and to let staff know, you know, that's something, the comments about seeing a restaurant there, I think would be wonderful. And I do think that, you know, it's a trade-off that I am, in terms of the parking, definitely would want to, I think is a valuable one if that's the opportunity. I think my point in kind of bringing up Commissioner Benjamin's comment was, I did want to say, like, I do think it's important for the Planning Commission to have the opportunity to look at it. It not being a decision that doesn't require any review, like to go straight from having retail to a restaurant, and also considering that our like parking requirements could change or who knows what, you know. So I was more that I wanted to see the opportunity to have Planning Commission input if that were the case. But I very much agree, and I do think that this, you know, that having a parking exceptions for those types of things is important. And I agree with them. And while I find it frustrating to constantly figure out what parking exemptions should be, I think this is frankly, a pretty unique case, actually. So I'm very supportive of that. So I just wanted to clarify that and to thank you for your bringing that up, Chair Reddick.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for clarifying. Commissioner Benjamin.
Thank you. Now I'm here. So I offered my comments as red meat, and I appreciated the carving up. That was well, I thought those were very well taken comments, no umbrage at all. Because we didn't really notice much of a conversation about parking exceptions, I've been pretty spare in my thoughts about it, but as my colleagues have weighed in, it makes me feel a little bit more comfortable stepping into this a little bit. I do believe that our model of commerce on Main Street has depended on immediate parking more than it should. My experience watching when I used to live on the other side of the hill, near Mountain View. I watched their downtown nearly suffocate under a restriction of inadequate parking as their shops, their cultural evolution took place in the 80s and 90s. And eventually they developed off-street parking, several levels of off-street parking. And it was a revolution in the quality of the development on Castro Street and in Mountain View we're talking. And I think I could envision some future like that, that really did not depend on parking on the immediate downtown. For that matter, the idea of using the existing street as additional space for sidewalk cafes is not offensive to me at all. I'm not wed to the parking as an absolute maxim, but we have the rules that we have at the moment, and as long as we have those rules, we have to ask ourselves about the cumulative impact of the various exceptions we have given out, as well as the ones that we will give out. And I won't speak of it again on this project because everyone has made their perspective clear about that, and I respect the will of the majority here. Speaking of the majority, I wonder if there are any commissioners who share Commissioner Vice Chair Polgar's and my view about the possible repeal of demonstrating resiliency in energy by having solar on the roof, or batteries, or some other mechanism to provide support. Let the record show Commissioner Hernandez's thumbs up on that. Thank you, Commissioner. Because I think that's another characteristic that doesn't just demonstrate aesthetic form, but it demonstrates functional form to which we as a city should aspire. And I think this is an opportunity to really reflect that. I was humbled by the deeper understanding of my colleagues, especially Commissioner Polgar and Commissioner Hernandez, about what it would be like to live on the ground floor in an ADA unit with very high ceilings. I can see the difficulties and the challenges. I don't know how that can be resolved. Maybe there's clever use of skylights. I don't know. This is not my department, but I want to echo the concern and hope that a solution can be found that will make it work. I appreciated that you picked up on my storage concerns, Sarah. It may be that interior design work can make good use of floor space in a way that provides storage without feeling like yet another closet carved out of the footprint of the room. Maybe it's under a bench seating, or I don't know what. And I agree that having trees in the Paseo in that location does look to me like it would be a challenge. I have no idea about what kinds of clever light articulation could happen that would facilitate that, or whether there's a possibility of non-tree vegetation that's still alive. But again, I defer to the architects and the wizards of urban spaces here. I would like to ask about the implications of subdividing a lot and having a fairly large number of residential units, and whether that would result in a requirement for the retirement of building entitlements elsewhere in town. I am unclear on that at the moment.
Were you finished, Commissioner Benjamin? For the moment?
I did not want to punctuate that by saying that is a question, but yes, that is a question.
Are there other commissioner deliberations, or would we like to give city staff a chance to perhaps answer Commissioner Benjamin's question and any other comments that you'd like to make? I don't see any other commissioners with hands up, so I'll invite city staff to make any comments they might like to, including whether we've given you the feedback that you asked for at the beginning of the study session.
I think I want to make sure that Doug feels like he's heard the feedback. A number of the comments that we heard tonight about design detail, massing, storage, kind of functionality of parking in the Paseo and even the signage for the Paseo. These are things that are consistent with the Architectural Advisory Committee and staff input. And yes, this is a work in progress. So we're glad that you understand that. We did not want to bring you something fully cooked because there was enough to discuss about parking. I do want to note something about parking exceptions and our new parking code for the record, because I think it's really important. I think folks on the commission feel like you've granted a lot of parking exceptions, and you've done a few, but you've only done one with the new code, and it was for, I think, one space. So the other exceptions were with the old code. And so the new code is very close to what build out can produce. On this site, a combination of things make it so that they're not quite making those ends meet, including the fact that they're retaining an existing building. They have an L-shaped property, and they're trying to put a lot on it. So, you know, there's all those things. We got to be straightforward about that. So I just wanted to reassure you a little bit about that, and ask that we run with our code a little bit longer, because I think it's working better than we might realize. And I can see why it doesn't seem that way, because you have granted a number of exceptions in recent times. I need to go back and study the lot retirement question, but I do want to put in the record, without lot retirement, that property can yield at least this many units under the density that's allowed in the zoning. So the subdivision is not enabling additional build out that couldn't be accomplished the way that it's subdivided now. So it's sort of an unusual circumstance relative to the more typical category of subdivisions where lot retirements have been required. So we'll go back and look at that. But I do think that's important, and it is in the town center. But I'd like to turn it over to Doug. Doug, if you want to sum up, or if you had any questions about the feedback, we want to make sure that you have a chance to address them.
Sure. First of all, it's been very helpful, and I appreciate all the input from the Planning Commission. I would reiterate what Jill said, that pretty consistent with some of the input from the Architectural Advisory Committee, also consistent with some staff concerns have been raised. So I'm actually, it may have seemed a little bit on the brutal side to the applicant, but I'm a little bit encouraged that we're all seem to be sort of on the same page. And I think, you know, just in summing it up, a lot of the concerns are just the level of detail that's been provided in the plans. It's hard to visualize really what's going to make this project kind of snap and stand out. And those things can be accomplished without, you know, starting from scratch. And I think that's a big step forward for us, because we have not always been in that place. We were starting over a few times on this one. I think some of the concerns raised about tenant amenities, especially in the building that fronts on Kelly, are appropriate. As I mentioned in the memo, there are some little tension between some of our policies on design review for protecting privacy between neighboring residential properties and that sort of thing. But a lot of that, at the end of the day, it's sort of a compromise what seems to work best. And I think there is some room to work on some of those windows, looking at the floor plan. What is that room used for? What is the optimal window configuration? I think those are all things that, again, can be worked out without throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Generally concur with the idea of just sort of tenant amenities, bike lockers, maybe a little more private open space. I think we're all on the same page with that. So I think we've got clear direction. I think we need to get back with the applicant and the architect and sort of regroup and brainstorm a little bit and go from there. But yeah, overall, I think it's been a very good meeting, very helpful for us. Going into these things, we're sort of shooting from the hip and saying, well, I think the Planning Commission may support this, or they may not. It's good to actually get in front of you and get some feedback.
Good. Well, thank you, Jill and Doug. Commissioner Hernandez, is your hand up?
It is. I thanks, Doug. I think that was really helpful for you to summarize your observations, and Jill, it was really helpful for you to also give us feedback on what you've heard so far. So I'm going to lay out my perspective on this. Housing is so valuable here that when we build housing and we build multiple units of housing, I'm always concerned about the quality of what the units we're putting on the market. We want these to be high quality units. We want the space to be livable. I mean, Sarah and I have already expressed the concerns about the ADA space. If you're in a wheelchair, the last thing you want is a dank, dark space with a low ceiling that makes you just feel like you're in a dungeon, right? Like, there are things that are in the control of the architect that can deal with these things. From the rest of us who have to observe this building and interact with this building in our daily life, the aesthetics are more important than a parking spot or two, which is, there's quibbling about this. So I really think we need to get the aesthetics right on this building. It trumps many other things in the thinking from my perspective. It's a prominent location. It feels very bland based on what we've seen so far. And I've already expressed this. I just would like to see something that just says this has some character. It's interesting in this space, and it's a location that could be helpful for that. And the third thing is, I feel like this design fails to take into account the views that are accessible from this location, especially on the eastern side of the property. And I know you've got privacy concerns and there's all kinds of things around this, but I mean, when I looked at the detailed plans, there's a TV on the wall that faces the eastern slope of the mountains. Like, you want to have a big window so that when you wake up in the morning, you can see the sunshine streaming in from the mountains. I mean, it is one of the most spectacular views on the planet. You got to take advantage of this. And the previous design on this project from a prior applicant took advantage of that. And I would encourage the applicant and his architect to go look at those previous designs, including the scale model that are still available, because I think they help inform the thinking and make this a better project. And that's ultimately what we're looking for. Is we want the best possible project on this particular location. And we understand the constraints the applicant's working on, but we want to see something really good here that we can all get excited about. So that's it.
Thank you, Rick. I think with that, we are ready to move to our next agenda item, which is the resolution to certify conformance of next fiscal year's capital improvement program with the city's general plan. So we'll invite city staff to present on this.
Tonight you have our city engineer, Maziar Bazarginia. Thanks, Maz, for hanging out. Do you have I think Maz has a presentation he will.
Yeah,
he's
I'm going to
queuing
start
up to
sharing
share.
it right now.
Great.
Welcome, Maz.
Thank you. It's nice to be here, Chair Ruddick and members of the commission, and anybody that's watching and will watch later on in this recording. I'm Maziar Bazarginia, city engineer with Half Moon Bay, and thank you for the quick intro. I'm here tonight to present our capital improvement program for the upcoming fiscal year 21-22, specifically looking at the general plan conformance. My PowerPoint's frozen, I'm sorry. All right, there we go. So here's what we're recommending tonight. It's for reviewing of the upcoming year's program, as well as the resolution with the findings that's attached to the staff report. The last time this the capital improvement program went before anybody was the city council. There was a workshop on April 6th where they provided some direction, and we feel comfortable with the list of projects here tonight that we're presenting. So just a little bit of background. What is it? What is a CIP? It's a dynamic community planning and fiscal management tool to coordinate the location, timing, and financing of capital improvements over a multi-year period. For our jurisdiction, the way that we've been prioritizing the CIP as far as what makes it the list and what doesn't are the basic threshold of $30,000 on a particular project. We also have two different distinct types of improvements that are identified. It's the either a one-time enhancement project or the programs which are generally smaller ongoing improvements within the same category, such as the Parks Implementation Plan as an example. So here's an overview of our CIP, and I do want to make one note. There was a small error in our staff report, and I believe that was a carryover from last year. We actually have 8 categories, not 7, that's listed in the staff report. What was missing from it was the operational improvements category, and that's because last year after the COVID financial impacts, that the projects from operational improvements was completely removed from funding. So we're adding that back with what we're presenting tonight. I also want to talk a little bit about just some of the challenges, ongoing challenges for our capital projects and the delivery of some of them. Again, we have the 8 categories. 7 of those categories outside of the sewer category are limited to general funds and grants and special funds. Obviously general funds are the source that is the most available, but also the most needed for so many different category areas and outside of the capital investment itself. As far as our budget, we still also have a little bit of uncertainty as we go through the budget process. There are still some unknowns about the post-COVID recovery. Our finance department is still reviewing projections of numbers. So depending on what those numbers come back, we will see what's going to be available for capital investment versus some of our other major priorities for the city's undertaking. We also, as far as the amount of funding that's presented for this project, we were estimating about $2.5 million in general funds and overall expenditures of about $3.5 million with grant funding that's tied in there. Right now, I'm going to go through a few project highlights. I haven't listed every single project or program in our list, but I'm happy to answer any questions on any of them afterwards. But I'll go through a few highlights and then we'll open it up to questions. So one of the first ones is the Green Infrastructure and Stormwater Program. This is one of those ones, one of the programs where we have a number of smaller implementation strategies and projects that are part of it. One of them is the implementation of the total maximum daily load program. That's the city's being a part of. So the Venice Beach TMDL program was adopted by the Regional Water Board in the last couple of months. And we will be putting together our implementation plan, looking at addressing some of the water quality and bacteria issues at our public beaches. Venice Beach was one of the higher ones. Pillar Point Harbor was the other piece to the TMDL program that's being implemented. We're also going to be looking at updating our stormwater master plan and looking at necessary projects for future years. One other thing I just wanted to mention was one other thing that we're looking at doing through this with some support from funding from this project and program is what's called the BEAST program. It's short for Bioswale Education and Stewardship Training. It's a pilot project that was approached to us by CCAG stormwater folks, as well as the UC Extension program. We have a master gardener through the UC Extension program that's looking to basically set up a program to train other master gardeners on bioretention, planting in soil, and kind of the maintenance that goes on with that. And so this one, we'll see how this works out this year. Hopefully they will continue this program, funding dependent, but we're looking at potentially looking at educational opportunities. Pre-COVID, they were talking about working with Cunha Middle School to provide some education to some of the classes in there. But for now, it's just going to be training. Next on the list is our climate action and adaptation plan. This project was recently I believe we recently received an update to Planning Commission. The last council update was in February. And so most of the work is being done in-house. And the only other thing I wanted to mention is that the next piece, there's been a lot of outreach and efforts going on, but the next piece is going to be the release of the public draft, which is anticipated this summer, July or August. The courtyard was another, it's another project I just wanted to highlight because of how important it was to our overall functions as a city. Some of you may know the city has been leasing and leasing the property and looking for a permanent home for our corporation yard, which houses our maintenance activities and a lot of our site storage and materials that we have, like barricades and park benches. And the site that were on, we were being leased. So a lot of our folks were working out of temporary facilities. And so with the purchase of the courtyard, we are actually looking forward to making some actual improvements. The project's just kicking off the design phase, and I'm sure we'll be back to Planning Commission soon, as soon as we have some plans to review and go over that with you guys. Another highlight is our manhole rehabilitation program. We are in a constant state of addressing I&I and our infiltration of stormwater and groundwater into our sewer system. As most folks know, the fees that the city pays for the treatment of the effluent material is tied to the amount of flow. So, and there's no way of separating out those two once they mix in the pipe. So once it gets in there, all of that flow needs to be treated. So what's important is for us to, in this program, is to identify some of the higher areas of concern. We have assessments of all of our infrastructure. Over the last few years, we've been really ramping up our program in response to some of these issues. So we're actually just completing the 2020 phase, which was construction of manholes throughout the city. A lot of this was focused on the east of Highway 1, north of Main Street in the Terrace area. And then we're going to be working on our next phase, which is looking at the areas of the most concern. So we'll meet with our SAM counterparts and look at our more recent inspection data and address additional manhole repairs as we need moving forward. The Highway 1 Safety Project North. This project, I think a lot of you folks have seen it. This came to the Planning Commission for a CDP approval and CEQA finding back in 2018, I believe. It's been steadily moving forward. A lot of Caltrain's review and approval, it's been hung up in that area a little bit. We also have been working with utilities, mostly PG&E, on addressing utility conflicts, and as the pandemic hit, a lot of those agencies and the coordination slowed for a bit. So we're ramping back up, but we're looking at getting those Caltrans approvals and addressing the needs for our any relocations for utilities, and hopefully looking at construction in the next fiscal year. After this coming year. Another project that's been on the books for quite a while is our Main Street Bridge rehabilitation project. We're still moving forward as we've provided minor updates in the past. We haven't met with the advisory committee in quite some time, and that's been because of a lot of back and forth with Caltrans on this project as the project has protective bridge funds, which are federal funds. Caltrans is the oversight agency that we've been working with, and there's been a lot of back and forth on some of the historical aspects of the bridge and what is considered historical versus what it's not, and the state takes their own review and opinion on some of those issues. So we've been kind of working back and forth, and appreciate all of our planning staff that's been supporting us on this and many of the other projects. Doug Garrison, along with all the other projects he's working on, has been really supportive of our staff. He's worked a lot on our Main Street Bridge projects. So anyways, we're still working through the process with Caltrans, and as far as our start date, we're looking at hopefully 2022-23 fiscal year as our starting point for construction. We'll take a close look at the funding. The Highway Bridge Fund is a impacted fund, and there are some concerns with future funds. So we'll see what happens with any federal stimulus, and the hope is that that funding mechanism does get a flush of cash hopefully soon, because just on the books, there's just more projects than there is funding available throughout the state. Another quick highlight on the Poplar Streets project, we are restarting this project. This was one of the ones that ended up being put on pause after the COVID pandemic hit and the fiscal uncertainty crept in, and so the city council made the difficult decision to put this one on pause. We're looking at restarting this project up. At this point, we're working to get our designer back on board and looking at taking another look at the design. We had left it off with a good community meeting in December of 2019. A lot of feedback was received on that conceptual design. So we'll look to refine that a little bit based on the comments received, and we'll be providing an update to the community again in the future as we have something to share and restart this project. Our goal for the upcoming fiscal year would be to complete the design and environmental and submit our application for funding that we have for this project through Caltrans. Next on our list is our car park improvements. Again, I won't spend too much time on this project. Planning Commission had this before them just this past March, where you folks approved the CDP and made the findings for CEQA. And so the design at this stage is pretty much wrapped up. It's close to being 100%. So at this point, we're gonna continue looking for grant funding for the construction, and if we get funds, we will look at scheduling this into our construction budget. So that's why this is on the list this year. We'll stay and we'll keep this on the list with the hopes that we'll get funding sooner than later and be able to actually make these wonderful improvements that the community has spent so much time on. Next one I have, I'm getting close to the end. So next highlight is our Poplar pedestrian pathway project. This is one that was added to the project list last year and was restarted as part of the mid-year budget. So we're looking at replacing the access path that's parallel to Poplar Street from Railroad Road to the Coastal Trail. What we are planning to do is a full depth reclamation. So we will be removing the asphalt and doing a full reconstruction. Similar to some of our major reconstruction projects we've taken on in the past, instead of an export of the unsuitable material and import of new base material that would go below the AC section, we're actually utilizing the full depth reclamation where we will mix hardeners into the soil and basically use that as the base material. It's been holding up really well in some of our vehicular streets. And so we're looking to utilize that same cost saving measure on this one. It'll give us a good product, final product, and hopefully will last us much longer than this last pathway section lasted. So as far as this one is going, the design and environmental is underway. We should have a public draft in the near future, and we're actually looking to complete this design and environmental process in the next few months, and we're targeting to do the construction fall of this year with the good weather and wrap it up right before the rainy season, which is the middle of October. All right, last project I just wanted to highlight was our East Side Parallel Trail expansion. As part of our efforts to complete our bike routes throughout our corridor, especially along Highway 1. We've been working to complete the Sequin design. There was a little bit of a Caltrans delay on this project. We had hoped to be going towards construction in the upcoming fiscal year. We may still get to that point towards the tail end of the fiscal year, but we'll have to see what happens with Caltrans and their process. If in case anybody's interested in that, originally this size of a project usually would just require an encouragement permit from Caltrans. But given some of the spans through over water courses, they took a different approach to it and actually put us in a peer process, which is a preliminary engineering and environmental review process. It's a little bit more hands-on from Caltrans is basically what that means, and a little bit of a longer process. So we're working on getting that process going, and in the next fiscal year, look to wrap that up and complete our design and then
Through the chair.
Commissioner Hernandez, I think that Winter wants to address us before we get into any discussion or questions.
Okay, great.
So here I've just basically put the list that's attached to the resolution. This was I think everybody's received that update as part of the supplemental memo. So I won't spend a lot of time, but I have these here in case we want to look through any of the specific items. And again, back to what we're asking tonight is a review of first of all, review of the CIP program for fiscal year 21-22, and then the adopting of the resolution with the findings that it's consistent with the city's general plan. As far as next steps, after tonight, hopefully depending on tonight's comments and deliberation, hoping to take this item as part of the overall budget, which would be on the first meeting would be on June 1st of the City Council. And then I believe looking at adoption of that budget and on the 15th. So I'll end it with that and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Maz. I'm going to ask if Winter wants to make her remarks now before we get into questions.
Thank you, Chair Ruddock. I just wanted to take a couple minutes to briefly mention some particular Fair Political Practices Act issues that come up whenever the commission or any public agency is considering a program like this, a resolution involving these many discrete projects that Maz just described some of. So we are handling the CIP and the resolution that's proposed before you similarly to how you all handled the land use plan when we went through that final process of consideration. And Under the FPPA, every member of the commission can vote on the final motion, the final resolution at the end of deliberations. However, I just want to remind you all that if anyone wants to talk specifically about an individual project that's part of the CIP, that is fine, but please give your fellow commissioners a moment when you bring it up, a little fair warning, so that if any of them have a conflict with respect to a particular project, if the project is close to their home, for example, then they will have the opportunity to recuse themselves on that discussion. The rest of the commission can then discuss any, particular project or issue. And when the discussion is complete, we can bring back the commissioner who has recused him or herself. So this is, we did this once before, at least with the land use plan. I know Commissioner Gorn wasn't with us then. But I just wanted to get that reminder in before folks started talking about the program.
Thank you, Winter. And Jill?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow up on one other item because I think it may be obvious to a lot of folks, but in case it is not, and we have others observing or looking at this later, some of the projects that Moz presented to you have already received entitlements. They went through the Planning Commission. As he noted, Doug was a planner for a lot of them. Scott has done a few of them, and Brittany's also a planner on some of them. They're not all entitled yet. So if, for example, the Poplar Pathway project that Moz showed you tonight, I'm going to give you an update about it in the director report because we are targeting a hearing date for it this summer. So not everything on the list needs to have a coastal development permit, but if it does need one and you don't think you've seen it yet, it's because you haven't, and you will see it. Your consideration of general plan consistency is fairly broad, and remember that it doesn't foreclose any of the deliberations that you're going to make on individual projects and making findings relative to the local coastal land use plan, the general plan, and all the other kind of measuring sticks that we need to use for looking at coastal development permits. So I hope that maybe preempt some questions if there were some projects that surprised you there. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you for your memo the other day about this process. I took from that we as commissioners want to bear in mind that tonight's resolution has to do with findings that this list of programs conforms with the general plan rather than us getting into the nitty-gritty about the aspects of the different projects. But with that, are we to do clarifying questions to Moz at this point, and then possibly see if any members of the public want to comment?
Point of order, Chair.
Yes.
As we are approaching 10:30, I wonder if you'd entertain a motion to extend the meeting to 11 o'clock to get us through.
Good idea. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll ask Bridget to do a quick roll call on this.
Commissioner Benjamin,
Yes.
Commissioner Gorn,
Yes.
Commissioner Hernandez,
Aye.
Vice Chair Polgar,
Yes.
and Chair Ruddick.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you, Jimmy. Are there questions for city staff? Vice Chair Polgar.
Rick, I'm just going to jump ahead because mine's very quick. I just want to make sure that I understood that the presentation included some highlights, but we are approving them as a package together, looking at all of in terms of the materials we received. And it doesn't matter that some might not be projected to be completed or or worked on this year, perhaps, that there's uncertainty in that. It doesn't matter. We're just looking at this as a whole, and that's how that's what we're being asked to do is approve the package of programs and projects. Is that correct? Am I understanding that properly?
Yes, it's correct in that the list, for us to be able to work on any of these projects, we need to have the finding on an annual basis. And depending on, the budget and how the city council decides to, appropriate for the projects, will determine how, which ones move forward. But I don't know,
Great,
Jill,
thank
if you want to add anything there.
Thank you. That was all
I just want to clarify, just because I think Commissioner Polgar or Vice Chair Polgar, I think you are speaking the same language, but I don't know if everyone would take it that way. The commission's not being asked to approve the list of projects. This list of projects is council's discretion. You are being asked to confirm that all of these projects are consistent with the city's general plan, which includes all of the general plan elements, as well as the local coastal land use plan, in that the local coastal land use plan serves as the city's land use element for the general plan. So the commission is making sure, and is the planning body who makes these findings annually, that you have consistency there. This is similar to what you do, for example, when public property is purchased or sold. You're not approving of a purchase or a sale of property, but you're looking at consistency with the general plan.
Thank you, Jill, for that. Commissioner Hernandez.
So maybe my comment is a little esoteric, but I'm concerned. I mean, the projects in and of themselves that I've seen before me, from my view, seem consistent with our general plan and the new certified land use plan, but there's an omission of carbon sequestration projects and what we saw before us. I don't see a recycled water project before us, and I'm concerned about accessibility, the Murata Bridge project. And so I don't see those three things addressed in this budget. And so my concern is about the omission of projects that would make this plan more consistent. And I just like some feedback of where are those types of things, because they would make this budget more consistent with the general plan and the new land use plan that we've recently adopted.
Moz, through the chair, I'd like to take a first swipe at this and then request adult supervision from Moz for anything that I missed.
Please do.
Okay, great. With regards to carbon sequestration, you do have a relevant plan that is being completed, the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. And so that's really setting the table for looking ahead at projects of that nature, including projects that might involve conservation or restoration, wetland development and enhancement that could be carbon sinks. So we don't have a project on the table to sequester the carbon, but you do have a plan that's bringing you towards that. I don't have a comment on recycled water. I'm going to defer maybe that one to Moz. That's a big nugget, and it's bigger than the city. But regarding Murata Bridge, that was another thing I was looking forward to updating you about. That is a San Mateo County project that is in the jurisdiction of the Coastal Commission. And not to get into the nits of it, I was going to let you know that the Coastal Commission is going to see that on Friday at a public hearing. And we can give you more information about that at the end of this. I hope that one helps. That one's really specific. So Moz, anything on recycled water?
Yeah, I'll just mention, I think, it's too bad that the Coastside County Water District met tonight at 7, same time as this meeting. But yeah, I think that would be a great question to explore with CCWD. I know in the past they were not interested, or I don't want to say not interested, but I think they were looking at the cost benefit ratio, and it hadn't been as much of a priority at the district level. Because that, if for that to become a reality, the water provider would need to be a party to this. I think the city would be open to the idea. Obviously there's a lot of infrastructure that would go along with it. But I think that's a great topic to start a conversation with CCWD and see, especially in light of the new restrictions that are being discussed. They have an item tonight talking about restricting outdoor water usage because of the drought that we're in, given that we haven't received a lot of precipitation this year. So, I think that's a great point, Commissioner Hernandez. And I think in our conversations with the district, we'll bring that up to see if that's something that they're ready to jump into. And just want to mention on the carbon footprint real quick is that, some of the projects may have elements to them themselves. For example, the courtyard, I didn't mention it. I've only seen a very basic concept, but we're talking about putting solar panels out there, utilizing some of that area.
Yeah, so thank you, Maz. And on the carbon sequestration, so we listened to the environmental plan from the city earlier. The one thing lacking from the projects we heard before was a specific projects or sets of projects around carbon sequestration. We have carbon offsets and greenhouse gas reductions, but we live in a space with lots of farmland and lots of open space. So carbon sequestration should be the number 2 or number 1 thing we should be looking at, because we've got lots of space to do it in. And on the recycled water, I understand that's bigger than the city, but it's just, I view it as criminal that we're putting fresh drinking water onto the golf course when somebody like Ocean Colony Partners is willing to drop hundreds of thousands of dollars and more to get recycled water here, and we're having shortages. So I just, there are concerns I have from
Commissioner Hernandez, I want to go ahead, Winter.
Thanks. Just another yellow light here, to beware of what's on the agenda and what's in the CIP and what's not. Thanks.
Okay.
Let's go to Commissioner Benjamin.
Yeah, thank you. And it may be, just raise your hand, Winter, if I'm in yellow light territory again, and I'll stop. So my impression is that there are many, many projects that could be in the CIP if any one of us were the king of Half Moon Bay. And a lot of the ones that you just mentioned, Rick, probably were ones that I might pick. I might pick a few different. But my grasp of this task in front of us is that we don't get to pick which ones. It's that the ones that are here are the ones that we can decide are or are not consistent. If there's a different project that we think would be really nice and a higher priority, it doesn't matter as far as this decision. And I would love to be wrong, because if that's what you agendized, I have a lot to say. But that's a question as opposed to a statement. And I want to be sure I understand it, because if Rick is on the right track here, I'm going to change my direction and ask for an extended meeting.
Well, I think you're right, but I'll let the deputy city attorney, who's the expert, answer.
I think what's on the agenda is the consideration of the capital improvement program and whether it's consistent with the general plan. So I can take a look back at the agenda, but for now, my advice is to stick to questions regarding, what's in the capital improvements program and consistency with the general plan. But I do not believe we agendized a sort of more free-form discussion of capital improvement projects that the Planning Commission would like to see.
Okay, so I'll say I would love to go in the same direction as Rick, but I'm not going to go there right now. But thank you for the inspired thought. I appreciate it. I also want to point out because some of my fellow commissioners are probably aware of my focus on taking care of the Political Reform Act constraints, that I did speak with the city attorney earlier this week about some of the projects which might have been construed as being an area on which I should consider recusing. We agreed that there's a utilities exception that makes it quite easy for me to participate in the conversations if they need to occur. So if you're wondering why I'm not recusing, please don't worry yourselves. I wanted to ask Moz about the citywide point repairs program and the sewer improvement programs and projects. Not because I want a lot of details about it as much as the others, I have a pretty clear idea about what GIS implementation is or about a pump station and force main repair is. But for example, if there was a, say a 10-inch water line that was necessary for feeding the sewer plant that had failed or was at risk of failing again, would that be the kind of thing that's considered in a citywide point repairs program, or is that something different?
That would be something different. The point repairs program looks at taking care of offsets and damages to our existing sanitary sewer conveyance system. So those the sewer lines.
So it's the effluent lines, not necessarily things that are necessary for the performance of the plant that are outside of that.
Correct.
I see. Thank you. No further questions. Thank you.
Maz, I see that Highway 1 Safety South is not on your list. Is that because no funding is needed for that after this fiscal year?
That is correct. No funding is necessary, and I'm sure you guys have seen it. It's getting close to completion. We're almost there.
Good deal. Commissioner Gorn.
One quick clarifying question, off topic a little, but you mentioned, Maz, that we're going to find out about the money pretty soon, that there's an estimate coming. When do we find out?
That would be at the June 1st City Council meeting. That's going to be part of the finance presentation of the upcoming budget and kind of kicking off kicking that whole budget process off with the public hearing. So and I haven't seen the numbers either, so I'm really not holding anything back. I'm just as concerned and.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any further questions for city staff? Clarifying questions? Commissioner Benjamin.
Sorry, this is a public hearing item, right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
So in that case, why don't we ask if any members of the public who are in attendance would like to comment on this agenda item?
I'm seeing none.
Then we'll invite commissioner deliberation, starting with Commissioner Benjamin.
I'm prepared to move the resolution next in order.
Does that suit the commission? I imagine it does. But if there are further deliberations, we certainly don't want to cut that short.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're not allowed to get into the nitty gritty on what's missing from this. I'm just concerned that we're not going far enough. And so it's not on the docket. We can't deliberate extensively on what's missing. I've expressed my opinion on what I've already think is missing. So I'll just put it in the record that I'd like to see us find a way to dig into this in a more deliberative manner about what we should be doing. And maybe it's not our responsibility. Maybe that just sits to the city council, but that's my expressed opinion.
Well, that would be my judgment, that isn't the role of the planning commission, but I appreciate your sentiments. Vice Chair Polgar.
Just to maybe this is a clarifying question, but I just want to make sure that I understand that this is for, we will go through this process again next year. Yeah, okay.
Every year at this time for the next fiscal year.
And a little, just one more, because I love to clarify. You have a 5-year capital improvement program. It's the first year of each 5 years that you're looking at. It's the funded, the year that is really active and funded. So there are other projects in the CIP that you're going to want to take a look at once it gets published this summer, and we can let you know when it's done.
And
Thank you,
I'll just
Jill.
mention as far as process, just to add on to that a little bit. You know, we do kind of kick off the budget process with the listening sessions by City Council. So, you know, I think Commissioner Hernandez, I believe I've seen you at those before. I think you guys have participated overall, but that would be a great time to bring some of these issues up, and we can certainly look at tweaking our capital improvement program moving forward.
Thank you, Maz. Commissioner Benjamin.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Rick. I appreciate the opportunity. The listening sessions are a great time for the public to weigh in. And sometimes as a planning commissioner, it's hard to resist the urge to participate under decision in which you'll be exercising some discretion later on. That presents a certain tension in participating in meetings like that. But we're certainly not foreclosed from speaking with council members and staff independently to try to press. And I'm sure you have done that. I have done that. And I'm sure other commissioners who are more discreet than us will do that. So I don't want to sound like I was chiding you. I share your frustration. Thank you. And now I would like to move the resolution if you're ready.
I think we are ready.
I move the resolution next in order.
Second, give a second.
I'll second.
Thank you. Bridget?
Commissioner Benjamin,
Aye.
Commissioner Gorn,
Yes.
Commissioner Hernandez,
Yes.
Vice Chair Polgar,
Yes.
and Chair Reddick.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you for that. This brings us to our director's report. Director Ekus.
Thank you, Chair Reddick, and thank you for commissioners for a productive evening. I know it's late. I don't have a lot, but there's a few really interesting items, so please bear with me. Your agenda forecast, May 25th is your next meeting, and we have noticed that meeting for the short-term rental public hearing for that ordinance. We're putting the finishing touches on it, so you will have hopefully your final time with that. We have a single-family project that required environmental review. It's a single-family home with an ADU at 909 Grandview Boulevard. The ISMND was just completed and the circulation period is 20 days. The circulation period started yesterday and will end on June 1st. We will forward the document to you so that you can get ahead on reading. So this project will come to you at one of your June meetings. We're hoping for June 8th. If it's not ready, it'll be ready for your second June meeting. So you'll see something from Scott Phillips probably tomorrow. Scott is the project planner for that. And we just want to give you a heads up. It's really a good time to crack into some reading if you can, because we've got other reading materials coming your way. As mentioned during the CIP item, the Poplar Path is we're focused on bringing that to you this summer. Right now, looking at July 13th. It also needs environmental review, and an initial study and a neg deck have been in the works for that. So you'll have some more CEQA reading to do for that item. So as soon as that one's ready, we'll get that to you as well in advance of your meeting. Next week, a couple things going on with us. I have on May 19th, Wednesday, an administrative review for an accessory dwelling unit at 1574 Spinnaker. And then the Architectural Advisory Committee's next meeting is May 20th. They have two projects they'll be looking at. 727 Main Street is located across the street from the CCWD Water District office. It's a two-story existing development, and it is being proposed for some facade changes relative to some use changes. If the use changes require Planning Commission review, you will see it after Architectural Advisory Committee reviews this for the facade changes. They will also see 2778 Pullman. It's a proposal for a new house, which was in the former Stolowski Gonzalez plan development. This will be the second review of this home that's being proposed. Story poles will be going up, I believe, this week. It needs to be 6 days prior to the Architectural Advisory Committee's review. This had quite a bit of redesign to address a visual resource concern. So we just wanted the commission to be aware of this because you will be seeing this project too. And it is a good time to catch those story poles if you're out and about and you want to see what your friends over in the Architectural Advisory Committee are doing. And I see a question from Commissioner Hernandez.
When are those story poles going up?
I don't know exactly which day. We can have Scott give the commission an email. It needs to be by the end of this week. You could check on Friday. They should be up. Yeah.
Great.
Let's see here. Okay, so the other two kind of unusual things. So already mentioned is the Coastal Commission is taking up the San Mateo County's coastal development permit for the Murata Bridge. I encourage you to take a look at that staff report. It is posted online on the Coastal Commission website. Coastal Commission staff is recommending approval with conditions, and I think you'll find it very interesting relative to the work that you have just completed on the land use plan and how to address existing structures, limiting armoring and things like that for projects that they're all rather one of a kind and require fact-based analysis one by one. So it's quite a tome, but I think it's worth a skim at least of your time. We're looking it over and we're learning a lot. And then last but not least, our Coastside County Water District has an item. You heard from Moz about what they had on their agenda tonight. I do wish that their meeting didn't exactly overlap with the Planning Commission's second Tuesday meeting, but that's just the way they roll out. So I've actually never been to one of their meetings. Coming forward, they are going to be releasing soon the Urban Water Management Plan, the 2020 Urban Water Management Plan. So I'm looking for it every day. It should be posted on their website once it is drafted and ready to go. And we wanted to announce it to you because we know the public is interested in this from our land use plan work, and we obviously know the Planning Commission was very interested in the work that was being done with modeling and projections, etc. So lots going on, and I think Moz already talked about the City Council digging into the budget, and that's all I have for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Informative as always. Do any commissioners have communications to share tonight? Commissioner Benjamin.
Yes, thank you. Three things. First, a reminder that I expect to be out of town during both of the June meetings. So be aware. I will try, if there are rules that permit me to post that I'm available in a KOA campground with my dog in the middle of Nebraska, I will be happy to participate. Otherwise, if you don't need me, I will try very hard not to miss you. That's not easy. Second, there is some possibility that I will miss the last meeting of this month. That is not firmed up yet, but if you need a quorum, please let me know. If there's somebody who has a hard commitment elsewhere and it's going to break the meeting, let me know and I'll try to accommodate. And third, very briefly, I just wanted to issue a mea culpa at our second meeting in April, in reviewing the minutes of the project at the end of Terrace Avenue. I inexplicably read the minutes of that as not capturing the sense of the commission with respect to the the directions that the commission sought for protecting the riparian corridor and the requirement for buffers, setbacks, that sort of thing in that area. And in my amendment to the draft minutes of that meeting, I called out those things. And I just wanted to say, on reviewing them with very gentle direction from staff, I could see that they were there if only I had read them. So I apologize to staff. I apologize to you commissioners and the public for not catching that the first time. That's all.
Very gracious, Jimmy. Commissioner Hernandez.
May 25th is an important wedding anniversary for me, so I am not likely to be in attendance as much as I want to participate in the short-term rental hearing. I have a lot to say on that matter, but I'm a soft, I am a maybe for the 25th. We'll see what plans we do for that evening. So just want to put that out there.
Noted. Any other communications? Excuse me. How about a motion to adjourn then?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Benjamin seconds it with universal hand signals.
Commissioner Benjamin,
Yes.
Commissioner Gorn,
Yes.
Commissioner Hernandez,
Aye.
Vice Chair Folgar,
Yes.
and Chair Reddick.
Yes.
Motion approved. Adjourned.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all.
Be well.
You too.
Very good.